Chapter 1. I grew up in the countryside, and the villagers were traditional and conservative. Every year, the most important thing was to worship the ancestors and visit the graves. Worshipping the ancestors was on the morning of the first day of the new year, and visiting the graves was on the 15th day of the 7th lunar month. At that time, people in the countryside lacked food and clothing, but no one was careless about these two things. When worshipping the ancestors, they had to use a high-quality depilate pig head, and when visiting the graves, they had to have at least 3 desserts. However, there was a difference. When worshipping the ancestors, the desserts could be taken away and eaten by the family. However, the desserts used for visiting the graves couldn't be brought back. They could only be left on the graves for the ants and insects to eat. The desserts were low-quality peach biscuits. Even so, people in the countryside couldn't eat these desserts more than 2 or 3 times a year. Adults were traditional and wouldn't feel bad if they gave these desserts to the ancestors. However, how could children understand such things? On the 15th day of the 7th lunar month, I went to visit the graves at noon. When I arrived at school in the afternoon, my desk mate, the fatty, came over and asked me to go to the graveyard to steal some desserts. I already had the same idea, so we hit it off immediately. That night, we sneaked into the graveyard on the hillside near our school. Big and small graves were filled with desserts, and the wealthier ones even had a few portions of fruits. We were 14 or 15 years old, the age when dogs were bold and daring. We weren't afraid at all, and shortly after, we ate until our bellies were round. After eating too many desserts, I felt thirsty. I looked around and found a strange grave. The grave was covered in fresh soil, and the offerings in front of it didn't have desserts or fruits. Instead, there was a bag of peanuts, a bag of red dates, and a bag of something round. Later on, I found out that it was longan. Apart from these, there was also an exquisite wine glass. I was puzzled. Why would we use red dates and peanuts to visit the graves? Aren't those used during weddings? However, I didn't think too much about it. My mouth was so thirsty that I instinctively picked up the glass and drank it. At that time, I didn't drink wine. After I swallowed the wine, my eyes became watery and my stomach felt like it was on fire. I felt dizzy and fell to the ground. On the way home that night, the hot and humid summer night blew, making me even more dizzy. In the end, the fatty had to support me all the way home. When I got home, I told my mom that I felt dizzy and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I had a strange dream. In the dream, I stood in a room with many red candles. In front of me stood a woman in red clothes with a red veil on her head. I seem to have seen this scene somewhere before. A few days ago, when Buttface got married in our village, it was exactly like this. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I was only 15 years old. How could I get married? Someone shouted, "Bow to heaven and earth. Bow to your parents." I kneeled on the ground and kowtowed. My mind was blank until someone handed me a glass of wine. I lowered my head and saw the clear, white liquid in the glass. My brain quivered as I remembered the burning pain I felt when I drank that glass of wine. I was startled and woke up. After opening my eyes, I recognized that it was just a dream. I exhaled. However, before I could finish exhaling, I saw a shadow next to my bed. I glanced at it, and I was scared out of my wits. Beside the bed, there was a mass of red, blood red, as if someone was sitting there. Inexplicably, I recalled the bride in the red dress and the red veil in my dream. After staring blankly for a few seconds, I screamed at the top of my lungs and shrank back into the bed. The red shadow next to the bed was still there, not moving an inch. Not long after, the door was pushed open. My mom heard the noise and hurried to the door to turn on the light. However, after the light was turned on, I was even more scared. The blood-red shadow didn't disappear. Instead, with the help of the light, I could see it more clearly. It was the bride with the red veil in my dream. Even the dragon and phoenix embroidery on the veil were the same. Didn't they say that ghosts run away when they see light? Third baby, what's wrong? My mom put on her clothes and hurried to my bedside. I couldn't speak and pointed at the woman next to the bed with a frightened face. But strangely, my mom didn't seem to see it. She looked puzzled. My whole body shook, and my face turned red. I squeezed out a word, "Ghost." My mom smiled and rubbed my head. "Silly boy, You must be having a nightmare. There's no ghost. Go to sleep. You have to go to school tomorrow." I shook my head and pulled my mom's hand, not letting her go. In the end, my mom couldn't change my mind and lay down to sleep with me. However, the red shadow didn't move an inch. No matter how hard I rubbed my eyes, I could still see it. I didn't sleep for the whole night. At dawn, the red shadow finally moved. My heart jumped to my throat, but the red shadow just turned around and walked to the door. Then it disappeared in the blink of an eye. From that day onwards, the red shadow appeared at 11 o'clock p.m. every night. It didn't leave until 4 o'clock a.m. or 5 o'clock a.m. It didn't harm me or scare me. It just sat by the bed and looked at me through the red veil. I didn't dare to tell others about it, as I was afraid that they would think I was crazy. So, I didn't sleep the whole night. My family soon found out that something was wrong, but no one believed me. My dad even beat them up with a broom. After that, I didn't dare to talk about it anymore. The chubby boy, who was the closest to me, also noticed that something was wrong. He asked me a few times. I couldn't bear the pressure and told him. I didn't expect that the chubby boy would believe me. He didn't say anything back then. The next day, when he came to school, his eyes were red. He gave me a wooden sword and told me that he had made it according to the peachwood sword he had seen on TV. I lowered my head to look at it. The half-meter-long wooden sword was covered with uneven scratches. It seemed the chubby boy had used a pencil sharpener to make it. That night, when the red shadow came, I held the chubby boy's peachwood sword and shook it to encourage myself. Eventually, I gritted my teeth and stabbed the red shadow. The peachwood sword slashed across. I felt as if I had stabbed someone, but I didn't. The red shadow still sat there, not moving an inch. I slumped on the bed. It seemed the chubby boy's peachwood sword wasn't reliable. The next day, I told the chubby boy about it. He didn't believe me, so he came to see me at night. However, he couldn't see the red shadow, let alone stab it with the peachwood sword. Later on, the chubby boy gave me many ideas, such as black dog blood or rooster's blood. However, we were just middle school students. Where do we find these things? I couldn't find a way to deal with the red shadow, but I'd gotten used to seeing the red shadow by my bed every night. I wasn't as scared as before. At night, I could turn my head and curl up in my bed. Somehow, I could fall asleep. However, I hadn't gotten used to it for long. One night, when I woke up at midnight, I saw the red shadow lying next to me. I was so scared that I frowned again. But in general, she didn't bring me any harm. It was as if she didn't exist and was just a figment of my imagination. What changed my mind was the spring of the second year after the new year. At that time, I could sleep well at night. My personality had recovered a little, and I loved playing basketball with my classmates. Once, I sprained my ankle while playing basketball. It was serious, and my right foot couldn't touch the ground. I had to use crutches to walk. Half a month later, the muscles on my right calf started to hurt. The doctor said that the muscles had atrophied, and I needed to massage them regularly to stimulate them. During that time, my mom would massage my legs during the day. At night, when I woke up from the pain, I would look at the red shadow while massaging my calf. It was close to the middle school entrance exam. One night, I woke up because of the pain. I didn't know if I was worried that my leg would affect the exam or if the pain was too much, but I kept massaging my leg while crying. Inadvertently, I lifted my head. The red shadow next to me sat up and reached her hand toward my body. I was so scared that my tears stopped flowing. Although the red shadow had been around for a long time, she had never done anything to me. Did she finally want to take action today? I slowly backed away from the bed. However, I was already leaning against the wall. Where could I go? My leg was still injured, so I couldn't run even if I wanted to. The moonlight shone through the window, illuminating the red shadow's pale hand. Eventually, it touched my body. However, it didn't strangle me like I had imagined. Instead, it pressed on my right calf. Chapter 2. My leg felt like it was touching a popsicle. It wasn't the temperature of a human body. Almost instantly, I had goosebumps all over my body, and my mind went blank. After a few minutes, I finally understood what the red shadow was doing. I found it hard to believe, but the fear in my heart had subsided. The next few nights, the red shadow gave me a massage. To be honest, her hands were too cold, and she didn't have much strength. I didn't feel comfortable when she massaged my legs, but I could barely stop the pain. Magically, after a few days of massaging, my wounds were healed before the high school entrance exam. After that, I had a good impression of the Red Shadow. I vaguely considered her a friend who came to play with me every night. After the high school entrance exam, I was admitted to a high school in the county. The night before school started, the Red Shadow came with something in her hand. She gave it to me. It was the first time she had taken the initiative to talk to me. I received it and saw that it was a small jade bracelet. It looked like a ring that you wore on your finger. It was cold to the touch, just like the Red Shadow's hand. I didn't know why the Red Shadow had given me such a thing. Instinctively, I opened my mouth to ask her. However, the Red Shadow didn't seem to be able to talk. After giving me the bracelet, she continued to sit there in a daze. My high school was in the county, and I was a boarding student. After that, it would be hard for me to go home. I didn't know if the Red Shadow would come to see me at night. I wanted to ask the Red Shadow, but she couldn't talk. I wasn't sure if she could understand me or not. In the end, I didn't ask her. However, I couldn't sleep well that night. When I woke up, it was early in the morning. When I opened my eyes, the Red Shadow was still by my bed. According to the usual pattern, the Red Shadow should have left already. What's going on today? Before I could figure out, the Red Shadow suddenly stood up. Her body moved, and she disappeared. While I was puzzled, the Red Shadow flashed. She reappeared at the same spot. I turned around and looked at the jade bracelet on the bedside table. I vaguely understood that the Red Shadow was living in that jade bracelet. At this moment, the sky was bright. The Red Shadow disappeared for the second time. This time, she didn't come back. I picked up the jade bracelet. It felt even colder than the last time I touched it. At dawn, I asked my mother to find a red rope to tie the jade bracelet to my neck. It was amazing. In the summer, it was as hot as an oven, but after Red Shadow put the jade ring around his neck, I felt as if I had stayed in an air-conditioned room. The temperature around me dropped a lot. My dad rode a tricycle to send me to high school. On the way, we met a little fatty who was carrying his luggage alone. He was admitted to the same high school as me, so I called him to get on the tricycle and went to school together. We were assigned to the same class, so we naturally went to the same dormitory. After my dad helped us make the bed, he left me some money and left. As soon as the adults left, the people in the dormitory gathered together to chat. A skinny little guy mysteriously told us that our dormitory used to be a girls' dormitory, but it was changed to a boys' dormitory this year. As soon as we talked about girls, the people in the dormitory became interested. They surrounded the little guy and asked him about it for a long time. Finally, I understood. In the past few years, the ratio of boys and girls was out of balance. There were more and more boys in the school and fewer girls. Gradually, some of the girls' dormitory was changed to a boys' dormitory. Originally, it was just a small matter, but boys of our age were in the puberty phase where they yearned for girls the most. A group of people discussed excitedly. The wretched fatty and the skinny little Guomingming even started to search for traces of the senior sisters' lives. In the end, they found some clues on the wall next to my bed. There was a small flower carved there. The little fatty and Guomingming guessed that this bed used to have a great beauty. This was originally Guomingming's bed. The little fatty wanted to switch with him, but Guomingming was grinning from ear to ear. He didn't want to switch with the little fatty. The two of them argued for a while before giving up. That night, after everyone in the dormitory had fallen asleep, I took out the jade bracelet on my chest. I was a little puzzled. I didn't know why the Red Shadow hadn't come out yet. Eventually, I got impatient and shook the jade bracelet. I whispered, "Red Shadow, come out quickly." As soon as I said that, the Red Shadow appeared in front of me. Just like before, it sat motionlessly on my bed, staring blankly. It was just as I had guessed. The Red Shadow was living inside the jade bracelet. I carefully put the jade bracelet back on my chest. Looking at the Red Shadow, sitting on the edge of my bed, I was so happy that I fell asleep shortly after. The next morning, while I was sleeping, I was woken up by a scream. My first thought was that someone had seen the Red Shadow. I was so scared that I broke out in a cold sweat. I sat up and looked around. However, I didn't see the Red Shadow. Then someone asked me, "What happened to Guomingming?" After asking for a long time, He didn't reply. The people in the dormitory became anxious. They turned on the light and climbed up to see. When we got up, we were all dumbfounded. Guo Mingming was sitting on the bed. His shiny head was shining under the light. The little fatty was the first to laugh. As he laughed, he said, "Guo Mingming, when did you become bald?" "Last night, you—" Then the chubby guy stopped laughing. He just stared at me and kept quiet. Someone next to him asked, "Yeah, weren't you bald last night? Did you sneak out and shave your head?" "That's impossible. The dormitory building is locked after we go to bed. No one can get out." Guo Mingming pulled a long face. "I didn't go out. When I woke up, I found out that I was bald." While talking, he grabbed a bunch of hair from his pillow and said, "Look, my hair is still on the bed." We turned to look at his pillow at the same time. Sure enough, a big clump of black hair was neatly placed next to his pillow. It was the same as Guo Mingming's original hairstyle. It was impossible for him to have shaved his hair. It looked more like a mask. It looked normal, but I didn't know why it made my heart turn cold. It was the same feeling I had when the red shadow's hand touched me for the first time. The roommates who had been chattering away also stopped talking, and no one laughed anymore. After a while, the little fatty said with a strange expression, "Guo Mingming, are you bald to begin with? Did you take off your mask to scare us?" Guo Mingming didn't answer him. He just sat there in a daze. The chubby guy didn't say anything. It was obvious that Guo Mingming wasn't messing with us. After the preparation bell rang, Guo Mingming braced himself and went to class with us. When the homeroom teacher saw his bald head, he directly pulled him out and slapped him. Then he asked him what happened. The homeroom teacher didn't believe him no matter how he explained. In the end, the two of them went to the dormitory together. After seeing Guo Mingming's neatly arranged hair, the homeroom teacher calmed down. He stood on the spot for a long time. In the end, he told us to stay in the dormitory while he reported this to the principal. In the end, the school notified Guo Mingming's parents and asked them to take their child to the hospital. The homeroom teacher even asked our roommates not to spread this news. It was really strange, but to be honest, I wasn't really scared. After all, the incident with the red shadow had happened before. If there was something supernatural, I could accept it. However, after school in the afternoon, the chubby guy came to find me. He told me to ask for a leave from the homeroom teacher. He said that he had already asked for a leave and that I should go home with him. I was puzzled. I didn't know what was wrong with him. However, the chubby guy looked serious and didn't look like he was joking. My heart skipped a beat. I remembered what happened in the morning and asked him, "Fatty, do you know what happened to Guo Mingming?" Chapter 3. When he said these 3 words, the little fatty's pupils clearly contracted. Then, without waiting for me to speak, he pulled me impatiently and said, "Don't ask so much. Hurry up and ask for leave. Come with me to my house tonight." I understood what he meant. Fatty's father was a carpenter. Although he was a carpenter, he could only do one kind of carpentry, which was making coffins. People in our village called his father the coroner. When someone died, they would ask his father to deal with it. From collecting the corpse to arranging the burial, his father would take care of everything. Our village wasn't the only one like that. The neighboring villages also had this kind of coroner. It was our custom. Fatty's surname was Lin. Sometimes, people would call his father Coffin Lin. As for his real name, I had never heard it before. Since his family was in this line of work, he would more or less come into contact with some mysterious things. When I first met the Red Shadow, Fatty was able to make the peachwood sword and give me those ideas. It had something to do with his family's background. Now that Fatty had said that, I was sure he knew something. That was why he was in a hurry to ask me to go home with him. I was a little hesitant. "Fatty, what about the other people in our dormitory?" Fatty hesitated for a while. "It's okay if we both ask for leave at the same time. If everyone in our dormitory asks for leave at the same time, the teacher won't agree. Moreover, I don't think our classmates will listen to him. It's pointless." Fatty persuaded me to ask for leave. We took a taxi back to the village. On the way back, I asked him, "What's a ghost shaving? Is it when a ghost comes to shave your hair in the middle of the night?" Fatty shook his head. "It's not that simple. I don't know the details, but I know it's scary." When we returned to the village, it was already dark. Fatty and I went to his house. Fatty's house was located in a small forest on the east side of the village. There were no other houses on the other side of the road. It was a lonely house. During the day, I didn't think much of it. However, at night from a distance I felt scared. Speaking of which, I grew up with Fatty, but I've never been to his house. The only time I went was when I wanted to play with Fatty when I was young. In the end, before I could even reach the door, I was dragged back home by an old man in the village. My dad gave him a good beating. Since then I have learned another taboo in our country, that the house of a coroner is inauspicious and is not to be visited at will. When I arrived at the door, I saw the door of the Fatty's house and felt a little strange. Although the village was poor, most families had installed iron gates. Who would have thought that Fatty's house would still have a wooden door? Moreover, it was a wooden door made of a row of broken wooden planks. There was not even a lock on the door, so there was no fear of thieves breaking in. The Fatty walked in front and pushed the door open. Just as I was about to follow him in, I lifted my head and saw two green eyes staring at me. Caught off guard, my legs went soft, and I almost fell to the ground. My back was instantly covered in a layer of sweat. The fat man didn't stop. He took 2 steps forward and waved his hand, signaling for him to leave. Then, I saw a shadow dash forward and disappear into the courtyard. Then, I realized that it was just a cat. However, I still felt a little strange. I knew that Fatty didn't have a mother, and he and his father only had each other at home. It sounded strange for 2 grown men to have a cat. Following Fatty into the courtyard, Fatty stretched out his hand and fiddled with the courtyard wall a few times before turning on the courtyard lights. When the lights were turned on, I was startled again. The Fatty's yard wasn't big, but there were 5 or 6 coffins arranged neatly in the yard. They were all black, which was quite scary. I now understood why the fat man didn't care about the broken door. Since there were so many coffins in the courtyard, if a thief sneaked into the house in the dark, he would be scared out of his wits. There was no need to guard against thieves. The fat man smiled and explained to me, "These coffins have just been painted. They need to be left outside for a while. Don't be scared." While talking, he knocked on the coffin lid and put it in his mouth. I felt a chill down my spine. Just as I was about to ask him, a weak voice came from inside the house. "You fool, why are you back?" I lifted my head and saw that the fat man's father was standing at the door. He asked the fat man, but his eyes were fixed on me. I had heard from my parents that the fat man's father wasn't that old. He was around 40 years old this year. However, he looked really old. His body was thin and his back was hunched. The wrinkles on his face were so deep that they looked like they had been cut by a knife. From his appearance, people would believe that he was in his 70s or 80s. The fat man hurried to explain to his father why we were back. His father was holding a tobacco pipe and smoking it. When the fat man mentioned the word ghost shaved, the pipe in his father's hand fell to the ground. "What did you say? Ghost shaved?" The fat man's father's squinted eyes opened wide for the first time, revealing a pair of dim, yellow eyes. The fat man nodded and told his father everything that had happened in the morning. His father stooped to pick up the tobacco pipe from the ground. He sat on the doorsill and smoked in silence. Then, he stood up and asked us to wait for him there. Afterward, he went back to his room alone. Shortly after, his father came out with a clay jar in his hand. He stooped to pour the contents out of the jar, forming a line in front of the doorsill. I squinted and saw some gray powder. I couldn't tell what it was. After pouring the powder, the fat man's father waved his hand and asked us to step over the line. The fat man was standing close to the line. He wanted to go first, but his father pulled him back. "Let me go first." I didn't know what was going on. I wanted to ask, but seeing the stern face of the fat man's father, I didn't dare to open my mouth. I could only follow him and step over the line, entering the house. At first, I thought something strange had happened, but when I walked over, everything was normal. Nothing had happened. I exhaled in relief and lifted my head to look at the fat man's father. He furrowed his brows even deeper. At this moment, the fat man had also reached the line. He lifted his foot and stepped toward me. However, before he could reach me, I heard a scream. It wasn't the fat man's scream. I didn't know when the cat I'd seen when I entered the house had run to the fat man's father. The cat was arching its body, and its fur was standing on end. It stared at the fat man's feet and shrieked mournfully. I followed the cat's gaze and saw that the white line the fat man's father had poured out had turned black. The middle part of the line had turned black, and it was spreading to both sides. The lights in the courtyard were dim, so I couldn't see clearly. However, I felt that the black line looked like thick blood. The cat shrieked mournfully again. Then it stomped its feet and jumped toward the white line. Fatty's father bent down to grab the cat and threw it into the yard. Then he took out a shovel out of nowhere and scooped up the completely black and white line and put it into a box. The box looked strange. It was around 10 centimeters long and looked like a pocket-sized coffin. However, its color was different from the coffins in the courtyard. It wasn't black, but it was bright red. After putting the black powder into the box, the fat man's father put the coffin box away and took us to the house. That night, the fat man's father didn't ask anything. He directly asked us to sleep in the fat man's room. The fat man was a heartless man. As soon as he laid down, he started to snore. It made sense. He had grown up in a pile of coffins, so it was normal for him to be bold. However, I couldn't fall asleep. I kept thinking about Guomingming's bald head and the coffin in the courtyard. I felt a chill run down my spine. Chapter 4. Today was strange. I called for a long time, but the jade bracelet didn't respond. The red shadow didn't come out, either. In the end, I had to give up. I closed my eyes and prepared to sleep. However, right at this moment, I saw the fat man's cat. It was standing on the windowsill, staring at me with its pair of green eyes. I felt a chill in my heart when the cat stared at me. I sat up and hit it with my pillow. When the fat man hit it at the door, it ran away. But now it was evil. No matter how hard I hit it, the cat didn't move. Its eyes gazed at me. The fat man was sleeping soundly. I called him a few times, but he didn't wake up. In the end, I had to turn on the lights in the room. I turned around and didn't look at the cat. Eventually, I fell asleep. It was strange. When I went to bed that night, I was restless, but I slept soundly. I didn't wake up until the next morning when the fat man's father came to wake us up. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was the cat. It wasn't on the windowsill anymore. It was behind the fat man's father, its two eyes still gazing at me. I even noticed that its two pupils were in a straight line, which looked very strange. However, the fat man and his son were both here, and the sky was bright. I didn't feel scared. I just thought that the fat man's cat was of a different breed, so I didn't put it in my heart. After waking us up, the fat man's father asked us to eat breakfast. Then he left. I have something to do. When I get back, I'll take you back to school. As soon as he left, the cat also left. I felt much more relaxed. After we got up, the fat man hurried to get breakfast for us. I sat down, but I didn't have time to eat. Since last night, I had a lot of questions I wanted to ask. When the fat man's father was here, he wore a solemn face. Moreover, I wasn't familiar with him, so I didn't dare to ask. Now that his father had left, I hurried to ask the fat man what the white powder was. Why did the fat man turn black when he walked past it? Also, why his cat was behaving strangely. While eating his porridge, the fat man explained to me, the white powder from last night isn't strange. It's just a mixture of lime powder and bone powder. If you have something dirty on your body, you can just walk over it and get rid of it. After listening to him, I vaguely understood. In the past, when my father went out to work and came back, he would put something similar in front of the house. He would ask my father to walk through it to enter the house. He said that it could ward off evil spirits. However, what I had at home was a mixture of lime powder and chicken blood. It looked like a sticky paste, completely different from the powder I had seen last night. That was why I didn't think about it. I was curious, so I asked the fatty, "What kind of animal do you mean by bone powder?" The fatty said casually, "How could they use animal bones? The bone powder was ground from human bones." This time I was startled. The fatty's father had used human bones to grind into bone powder. In the past, his father had given me a gloomy impression. Now, he looked like a wizard from the fairy tales I had read when I was young. The fat man saw that my face didn't look right, so he explained, "What's so strange about that? My father was the village's coroner, and he had come into contact with many dead people. He used to clean up the dead children in the back of the mountain and the broken bones that the villagers dug up when they built their houses. What's wrong with getting some bone dust? Moreover, he used it to save people. He was right. In our village, children weren't buried in graves. They were put in baskets and placed on a mountain. There were also some unknown skeletons that were dug up by accident. The coroner in the village had to clean them up. Then he explained, usually when people come in contact with something dirty, it's a ghost. In other words, it's what we call ghosts. Once you come in contact with a ghost, your body will be covered in yin energy, which will bring bad luck and affect your health. The way to deal with yin energy was to mix it with something with heavy yang energy, just like the lime powder and chicken blood I used in my house. Besides, there were many similar methods among the people, such as black dog blood. However, if you encountered a ghost that had turned into a malicious ghost, these simple methods wouldn't work. When you encountered a malicious ghost, your body wouldn't be covered in yin energy. Rather, it would be a higher level of yin energy. It was called yin energy. Normally, things with heavy yang energy couldn't neutralize it. Moreover, yin energy was sentient. It would actively invade a person's 3 souls, which would lead to their death. The evil ghost that we often talked about was the yin energy invading the body. Whether it was a ghost or a yin energy, they were ethereal like a soul. They needed a vessel to survive. Otherwise, they would vanish from this world. It was also the reason why yin energy would actively invade the 3 souls. After yin energy entered the body, the human corpse would become a vessel for the yin energy to reside in. For example, the ghosts that we often talked about would attach themselves to corpses. They couldn't stay too far away from the corpse. The bone powder that the fat boy's father had used was to provide a vessel for the yin energy to reside in. That was how it separated the human body from the foul things. Last night, I saw the black powder on the fat boy's body because he had been stained with yin energy. After the yin energy was absorbed by the bone powder, it turned into a dark red color. After listening to his explanation, I had a whole new level of respect for the fat boy. Usually, he was a simple-minded person, but I didn't expect him to know so much. I also remember the red shadow. According to the fat boy, the red shadow was a ghost, and the jade bracelet she gave me was the vessel she was residing in. The only thing I didn't understand was that on the night Guo Mingming encountered the ghost and shaved his head, little Fatty and I were in the dormitory. I even slept on Guo Mingming's lower berth, which was closer to him. Logically speaking, I should have been stained with yin energy. But why was the fat boy possessed while I was perfectly fine? I wanted to ask little Fatty, but I remembered the frown on his father's face. I opened my mouth but didn't ask. After the meal, the little Fatty talked about the cat again. He said that there was nothing strange about it. Cats liked yin and could see some unclean things. Moreover, the cat had followed his father since it was young and had come into contact with many dead people. His father even raised it to devour yin energy. That was why when the yin energy was sucked out by the bone powder last night, the cat arched its body and screamed. In fact, it was looking for food, just like a cat that had encountered a chick and was arching its back to catch it. After listening to him, I vaguely understood why the cat had been staring at me last night. I guessed it was because of the red shadow. I was even more afraid of the cat now. I thought that I should stay away from it in the future. Although little Fatty had told me that people who provoked yin spirits would have bad luck and harm their health, I felt that the red shadow situation was different from what he had told me. She didn't harm me. Instead, she had helped me recover from my sprained ankle. I was sure she wasn't a dirty thing like the fat boy had described. With that thought in mind, I didn't have the mood to ask more questions. I followed the fat boy to wash the dishes. When it was almost noon, little Fatty's father came back with the cat. I saw that his feet were covered in mud, so I quietly asked, "Did your father go to the mountain?" Little Fatty nodded and whispered, "My family has an ancestral house behind a mountain." Whenever his father encountered something troublesome, he would go to the ancestral house. I understood immediately. Little Fatty's father was going to solve the case of the shaved ghost. Indeed, after his father came back, he didn't rest. He said that he wanted to take us back to school and took us to the village entrance. When we were about to leave, the cat followed us. However, little Fatty's father grabbed it by the neck and threw it back to the courtyard. When we arrived at the village entrance, we hitched a tricycle and headed to school. Little Fatty's father was very quiet. He didn't talk along the way and just smoked the pipe in his hand. Little Fatty was a man who couldn't stay idle. Yesterday, he was scared when we talked about the shaved ghost. But today, he wasn't afraid anymore. Instead, he proactively asked his father about the shaved ghost. It was no wonder why he didn't tell me when I asked him yesterday. It turned out that he didn't know much about it. Fatty's father didn't seem to want to talk about it. In the end, he put down the pipe in his mouth and sighed. A ghost shaves his head. A ghost shaves his head, so naturally it's an een head. How can a living person have their een head shaved? My heart sank. From what little Fatty's father said, it seemed that someone was going to die. Although he had just met Guam Mingming, they were roommates. No one could bear to see such a thing happen. Little Fatty was a little worried. He asked his father, "Dad, you can save him, right?" Little Fatty's father shook his head. It's hard to say. Hearing little Fatty's father say that, our hearts became even heavier. We didn't say anything on the way and quickly arrived at school. Little Fatty's father sent us to the classroom. When the homeroom teacher saw us, he thought that little Fatty's father was just here to send us off. He even smiled and talked to us for a while. But when he heard that little Fatty's father was here to solve the strange thing that happened in the dormitory, his expression changed. He said to us, "Our school is a place to educate people. We don't believe in these feudal superstitions. The school leaders have already investigated this matter. It's a complication caused by Guam Mingming's illness. You guys shouldn't get involved." Let alone little Fatty's father. Even little Fatty and I didn't believe him. After all, the two of us had personally experienced it. Whether Guam Mingming was sick or not, little Fatty and I knew it better than him. But the homeroom teacher was our teacher. Since he said that, little Fatty and I didn't dare to retort. We could only look at little Fatty's father. Little Fatty's father finally broke his silence. He squinted his yellow eyes and said, "I don't care what your school does, but my child lives there. I can't let anything happen to my child." The homeroom teacher was a little angry. He said, "If you insist on saying that, I can change your child's dormitory. Of course, you can also let your child transfer schools." Chapter 5. Hearing the Fatty's dad's words, the homeroom teacher was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Although I've only been working here for 2 years, but as far as I know, the school hasn't had any deaths in the past few years. Big bro, I know you might be in this line of work, but you can't think of everything in that direction. Also, as your child's teacher, I want to give you a piece of advice. As a parent, you shouldn't set a bad example for your child. It's not good for the child's growth." Although the homeroom teacher said it with a smile, I could tell that something was wrong. Not only did he imply that the Fatty's dad came to the school to cheat money, he also accused him of not knowing how to educate his child. Anyone would get angry after hearing these words, but the Fatty's dad didn't get angry. He only sighed and pulled the Fatty and me away. I jumped in fright. Although I felt that the Fatty's dad was right, the homeroom teacher was still my teacher. If I offended him, then my days at school wouldn't be good. Also, if the Fatty's dad took us away, then how are we supposed to come to school? The result was different from what I thought. The Fatty's dad just took us out of the classroom, and when we arrived at the school, he asked the Fatty where the principal's office was, and directly took us there. Our school wasn't big, and the principal wasn't some big shot that was hard to see. When we found the office, the principal was already in the office, and after hearing the reason for our visit, the principal's expression immediately became serious. When the Fatty's dad asked the principal if there was a murder case in the school before, the principal's expression finally changed. He frowned and thought for a while, then asked, "You mean what happened in the school this time is related to the previous murder case?" The Fatty's dad nodded. The principal sighed and gave the Fatty's dad a cigarette, then said, "Old bro, you're right. There was a murder case in the school a few years ago. Because the nature of the case was quite bad, we tried our best to downplay the matter in order to protect the school's reputation. So many people never heard of it. Through the principal's narration, we learned of a major event that happened in the school 5 years ago. At that time, a second-year high school boy named Zhang Weiwei went out with a group of students to drink. Under the instigation of his friends, he took advantage of the alcohol and ran to the female dormitory to confess to the girl he had a crush on for a long time. Unfortunately, King Xiang was in love, Goddess was not interested, and the girl named Suya did not accept it. At this point, it was just a small matter of an unsuccessful confession. But then, under the double stimulation of alcohol and the environment of the female dormitory, Zhang Weiwei impulsively tried to rape Suya. After that, Suya didn't want to be humiliated, so she jumped out of the window and committed suicide. Zhang Weiwei knew that he had committed a heinous crime, so he escaped home and committed suicide before the police could find him. After the principal finished speaking, the fat man's father sighed and asked, "The dormitory where the murder happened was the dormitory where my son and the others lived, right?" The principal nodded, but there was some doubt on his face as he said, "After this incident, I also thought about the previous murder case, but it's been a few years, and nothing strange happened in between. So, I'm not sure if there's a connection between the two cases, so I can only deal with it and take it one step at a time. Brother, you have a lot of experience in this area. Since you're here, please help me. I'll be grateful." Unlike the previous homeroom teacher's attitude, the principal's attitude was unprecedentedly good. However, the fat man's father still had an expressionless face. When the principal finished speaking, he immediately asked, "The girl who jumped out of the window, was she bald when she died?" The principal was stunned. He shook his head and said, "No. After the girl was sent to the funeral home, I accompanied her parents to identify the body. Her long hair was intact. I'm sure of that." The fat man's father frowned even more. He muttered softly, "That shouldn't be. Since it's a place to shave in, it's a place to raise ghosts. There's no reason to let a good person go." At this point, the fat man's father suddenly remembered something and asked about the girl's birth date. However, the principal did not have it, so he immediately called the school's dean to check the school's archives and found the girl's date of birth. The fat man's father muttered to himself for a long time. In the end, he still had a puzzled look on his face. While the fat man's father was calculating, the principal and the dean were also talking about this matter. As they talked, the dean's expression suddenly changed. He went up to the principal and said something. Then, the principal's expression changed as well. He hurriedly went over to the fat man's father and said, "Brother, I didn't think about it when you mentioned it just now. The girl was not bald when she jumped out of the window, but the boy who committed suicide at home was bald when he died. It's just that boys have short hair, so when we found out that he was bald, we didn't think too much about it. And there's something else that's very strange at that time. The boy hung himself from a ceiling fan at home using a rope made of toilet paper. When his family found out, they went over and pulled on it, and he fell from the fan. Logically speaking, such a fragile rope should not be able to bear the weight of a human body, but the boy did hang himself. Because this matter had nothing to do with the police investigating the suicide, no one pursued the matter further. I didn't think too much about it at first, but now that I think about it, it's a bit strange." At this time, the fat man's father opened his eyes and nodded. As expected, people who shave their heads have lost their 3 souls, and their bodies are lighter than their souls. If that's the case, it makes sense. Let's go. Take me to the dormitory. Immediately, the principal called the dormitory's administrator and asked her to open the dormitory door. Then, we went to the dormitory together. When we arrived at the dormitory, the administrator, Annie Chun, was already waiting for us. Annie Chun was a woman in her 50s. When she saw the principal accompanying us to the dormitory, she thought that something had happened between me and the fat man, and that the principal had been alerted. Thus, on the way, she started to complain about how this floor used to be filled with girls, and nothing happened for a whole year. But now that the boys have just moved in, they're all mischievous. After she said that, the fat man's father immediately asked, "This dormitory used to be a girls' dormitory. Did the boys just move in this year?" Annie Chun was surprised. "No wonder it's been so many years. Last time it was a boy. This time, of course, it will be a boy." Auntie Chun didn't understand what the fat man's father was talking about. She turned to look at the principal with a puzzled face. The principal didn't want too many people to know the inside story. He found an excuse to ask for the dormitory key and asked Auntie Chun to leave first. When the principal was about to open the door, the fat man's father raised his hand and stopped him. He gazed at the dormitory door for a while and said, "The energy in this place is very thick. You guys wait here. Don't go in." Then he took the key from the principal and opened the door. He asked the principal and the dean to wait outside while I and the fat man entered the dormitory. As soon as we entered the room, the fat man shivered and muttered, "It's really cold here." I didn't feel anything. Ever since I had worn the jade bracelet that the Red Shadow had given me, I had felt cool all over my body. Even during the day, when the temperature was around 30 degrees Celsius, I didn't feel hot. Of course, I didn't feel cold either. The fat man's father said, "The energy here is thick. Of course it's cold. Which bed is your classmate sleeping on?" The fat man pointed at Guo Mingming's bed, and we walked there together. Since Guo Mingming was sleeping on the upper berth, the fat man's father climbed up alone. The fat man and I stood on our tiptoes to look around, but we didn't see anything. Soon, the fat man's father came down and took us out of the room. When we were outside, the fat man's father asked the principal if the girl named Su Yu was sleeping on Guo Mingming's bed. The principal and the dean answered in unison, "No." Then they told me that Su Yu's bed was under Guo Mingming's, which was my bed. This result scared me. I couldn't help but feel puzzled. If I was the one who slept on Su Yu's bed, why did Guo Mingming, who slept on the upper bunk, get into trouble? The fat man's father was also puzzled. He contemplated for a while, then returned to the dormitory. However, this time, he asked me and the fat man to wait outside while he entered the room alone. After waiting for a while, we heard a hissing sound. It was similar to the cat meowing we had heard in the fat man's room last night. Our faces changed. We didn't care about what the fat man's father had asked us to do. The four of us stormed into the room. It was a sunny day today. Earlier, the dormitory was bright, but when we entered the room, it was dark. The fat man's father was standing on the ladder that led to my upper berth. One of his hands was holding the edge of the upper berth, while the other was holding the pocket-sized red coffin I had seen last night. His body didn't move, and he didn't seem to notice that we had entered the room. The fat man saw that his father wasn't in a good condition. He hurried to pull him, but the fat man's father fell off the ladder. The white powder in the small red coffin in his hand splashed out, turning the entire room gray. Some of the powder even splashed on us. The principal and the dean didn't know what the powder was, but they didn't care. They went to check on the fat man's father. I was the only one who was scared by the human bone powder. However, I endured the discomfort and ran to the fat man's father. The fat man's father had fainted. We didn't care about anything else and carried him out of the dormitory. When I was about to go out, I glanced at the room and saw that the powder had stuck to the walls of the dormitory. There were many black marks on the surrounding walls. It looked like someone had used a charcoal pencil to crazily draw on the walls. However, under the black marks, there was a faint redness, just like the black powder I had seen last night. Chapter 6. This glowing green face was incomparably evil. After seeing it, I couldn't move my eyes away from it. Although my mind was still clear, I knew that I had to leave immediately, but my feet felt like they were filled with lead. I couldn't lift them no matter how hard I tried, and even my consciousness started to blur. Right at this moment, an extremely cold feeling came from my chest, jolting my spirit and freeing me from that indescribable daze. At this moment, the fatty also reached out to pull me, asking me why I didn't go out. I quickly turned around, stepped out of the door, and purposely closed the door tightly. That glowing green face made me feel extremely terrified. Luckily, I was the only one who saw it. If the fatty and the others saw it, then something bad would definitely happen. The fatty's father probably fainted because of this strange face. Also, what happened to Guo Mingming? It must have something to do with this thing beside his bed. After everyone left the dormitory, the fatty's father was still unconscious, and the principal had no choice but to call 120 and send the fatty's father to the hospital first. At this time, the fatty firmly disagreed and said, "My father specifically told me that if something happens to him, we definitely can't send him to the hospital." The principal frowned and clearly didn't care much about the fatty's words and retorted, "Your father is a capable person, but he's currently unconscious and can't save himself. What else can he do but send him to the hospital? Could it be that you can cure your father?" The fatty shook his head and said, "I can't cure him, But as long as my father is sent to my family's old house, then he can be cured. The fatty said firmly. And in the end, the principal also considered that the fatty's father wasn't a normal person. So he found someone to get a car and sent the fatty's father back to our village. Of course, the fatty and I also came back. On the way, I told the fatty about the glowing green face, and the fatty felt his hair stand on end after hearing it, especially when he remembered that he and Guo Mingming fought over the bed because of this pattern and even speculated that there was a beauty living on the bed. It made his hair stand on end. However, the fatty didn't think that his father fainted because he saw the pattern. The reason was simple. I didn't faint when I saw the pattern, and with his father's abilities, he definitely couldn't have fainted after seeing it. I opened my mouth, but I didn't know how to explain it to him. When we reached the village, I helped carry the fatty's father out of the car. Then, the driver the headmaster found drove away. The fatty stayed with his father while I went home to call for help. When I got home, I told my dad about what happened in the past 2 days. My dad didn't say anything and went out with me. On the way, he even went to the neighbor's house to call for help. It was not easy to enter the mountain, and it was even more difficult to carry a person in. Without 3 to 5 strong laborers, it was impossible to complete this task. Unlike the teachers in school, the people in our village never doubted this kind of thing. Of course, they didn't think that it was superstition. They just felt that it was something passed down from the ancestors, so it couldn't be wrong. The fat man's father was the village's coroner. Although the villagers had told their children not to go to the fat man's house to play, the fat man's father was actually very prestigious in the village. As soon as they heard that something had happened to the fat man, they put down what they were doing and followed him. Shortly after, my dad called 4 or 5 people to go with him. There was a kind of 2-wheeled cart in the village called a handcart. It was also called a rat cart. On the way there, my dad found a handcart. When we arrived, he lifted the fat man's father. 5 people took turns to carry him. Soon, they reached the foot of the mountain. When we reached the foot of the mountain, we didn't need to change to another transportation tool. In the countryside, the handcart's wheels and the body of the cart could be separated. People lifted the 4 corners of the cart and pulled the wheels outward. Then, we entered the mountain. The back of the mountain wasn't big, but it was deep and the road was hard to walk. There were some narrow places where 4 people couldn't carry him. We had to carry him in pairs. We had to take turns to carry him. In the end, the fatty and I also took turns to carry him for a while. After a lot of effort, we finally carried the fat man's father to the outside of his ancestral home. It was a tough journey. I couldn't help but complain. People in the village usually lived at the foot of the mountain. I didn't know what the fat man's ancestors were thinking. Why did they have to build their house on a mountain? When we arrived at the door, my dad and the others were about to carry us inside. But the fat man stopped them and said, "Uncles, my dad used to say that our old house has a lot of yin energy. Only virgins like me and Sanhua, who haven't lost their chastity, can enter, but adults like you might get into trouble." He was a young boy, so he was a little shy when he talked about losing his virginity. The unscrupulous elders around him laughed and mocked him. However, people in the village believed it. If it was the fat man's father, it couldn't be wrong. On the way here, they were also very tired, so they went home first. Before leaving, my dad specifically told us to be careful. He went home and asked my mom to prepare some food and send it to us later. After the adults left, the fat man and I carried the handcart and entered his ancestral home. The house had green bricks and stone tiles. Not only did it look ancient, but it also gave people a scary feeling. After we entered the house, the feeling was even stronger. If the fat man's house looked like a coffin shop, this place looked like a coffin museum. There were 2 coffin-like stools on the left and right of the doorsill. Inside, 8 coffins could be seen placed in 8 different directions, vaguely forming an 8 trigrams pattern. What was more frightening was that there were 2 memorial tablets on the east side of the house. The incense burner in front of the spirit tablets had 3 sticks of incense left. I guess the fat man's father had come to burn the incense this morning. Who would have thought that he would be carried back before the incense could burn out? After I put the fat boy's father down, I was about to ask him what we should do next. However, the fat boy directly went to the spirit tablets and respectfully lit incense sticks for the 2 spirit tablets. Then he turned to me and explained, "My father told me that every time I enter the ancestral house, the first thing I should do is to light the incense sticks." I lifted my head to look at the 2 spirit tablets. The first one was easy to recognize. It was Liu Ban's memorial tablet. The fat man's father was a carpenter, so it was normal for him to worship Liu Ban. However, the second spirit tablet was strange. The words on it looked like scribbles. I couldn't recognize them at all. I asked the fat man, and he explained, "My father's profession is to earn a living. People who earn a living in this line of work can't escape from the disadvantages. However, they can choose to worship either the god of death or the god of poverty. Those who worship the god of death are destined to be poor for the rest of their lives, but they can keep their families safe. Those who worship the god of poverty are destined to be rich, but their families are doomed to die." The fat man's family worshipped the god of death. Although the father and son were healthy, their family had always been poor. I didn't understand and asked the fat man, "If you can't have both, why did your ancestors choose this line of work and pass it on?" The fat man answered, "I heard from my father that once someone enters this line of work, the 9 generations of the family can't quit. They have to pass it on. Otherwise, their descendants will be cut off. As for why my ancestors chose this line of work, I'm not sure. I asked my father, but he didn't tell me. However, when I think about it, there are times when people have no other choice. I guess they encountered some difficulties." Ever since the fat man's father died, the jovial fat man seemed to have changed. He spoke more maturely. However, I was worried about the fat man's future. Will you inherit his father's craft? Although I didn't discriminate against this line of work, I still felt uncomfortable when I thought about how my friend would have to bury people and make coffins every day. The fat man shook his head. "My father's generation is already the 9th generation. I don't need to enter this line of work. My father told me that a long time ago." After hearing him say that, I relaxed a little. At this time, the fat man told me that I couldn't just put his father on the ground. I had to put him in the middle of the coffins in the ancestral house. I had seen too many coffins in the past 2 days in the fat man's house. My heart was already numb, so I wasn't afraid. Together with the fat man, we moved one of the 8 coffins arranged in the 8 trigrams pattern. After moving it, I realized that there weren't 8 coffins, but 9. There was one in the middle. Since the coffin was placed high up, I didn't see it earlier. After moving the coffin, the 2 of us carried the fat man's father inside and put the coffin back to its original position. After we were done, we sat on the ground to rest. I asked the fat man, "I can understand why you have so many coffins in your house to sell them. But why are there so many coffins in the ancestral house?" The fat man said in a matter-of-fact tone, "The ones in our house are sold to others. The ones here are naturally for our family to use." I was stunned. "Use for your family? There are only the 2 of you in your family, and you're still so young. Isn't it too early to prepare a coffin?" The fat man said strangely, "I didn't say it's for me. Look, the one in the middle is for my father. The one in front of us is for my grandpa, and the one next to it is for my great-grandpa." While talking, the fat man pointed at the coffins. My face turned green as I listened to him. "You mean your grandpa and the others are all in those coffins?" I didn't expect that there were corpses in those coffins. Although I had seen so many strange things in the past few days, my voice still trembled. The fat man didn't seem to mind at all. He nodded casually and sighed. "Yeah, my dad told me that our family worships the god of death. No matter what happens, as long as the person is still breathing, they can be brought back to life and placed in the ancestral house. If they can't come back to life, then their lifespan has come to an end. The coffins in the ancestral house were already prepared, so it was easy to deal with the aftermath. When the later generations are done with their work, they will continue to work. This is the fate of their family. After the 9th generation, we will seal the house and burn it down. From the 10th generation onward, they will be able to live as normal people." Chapter 7. The fat man's words weren't something he could say at his age. He must have remembered what his father had told him. The 2 of us sat there in a daze. Neither of us was in the mood to talk. However, the fat man was still restless. After a few minutes, He turned to check his father's situation. I was much calmer than the fatty. It wasn't that I didn't have compassion, but after what had happened, I realized that the jade bracelet that the red shadow was in seemed to be able to restrain the danger of the glowing green human face. I had seen the face earlier, and it was the jade bracelet that had woken me up. If the fat man's father didn't wake up for a long time, I would find a chance to put the jade bracelet on him. Not long after that, my father brought us dinner. After dinner, he asked me to go home. Of course, I didn't feel safe leaving the fat man here alone. However, after my father slapped me twice, I reluctantly went home. However, I had made up my mind. I would come here early the next morning. If the fat man's father still didn't wake up, I would put the jade bracelet on him. After a busy day, I felt really sleepy when I got home at night. However, I forced myself to stay awake until 11 o'clock p.m. I called the red shadow and asked her, "Did you save me today? Do you know what that strange face is? Can you save the fat man's father?" To my disappointment, the red shadow was still the same as before. She sat on the bed in a daze. No matter how many times I asked her, she didn't say a word. It seemed she didn't know how to talk, which made me feel very discouraged. The next morning, my mother had prepared breakfast. I didn't have time to eat and just took the breakfast for 3 people to the mountain. The path in the mountain was very rugged, and there were many trees and grass on both sides. Some parts of the path looked like a sealed corridor. In the early morning, it looked a little gloomy. However, I wasn't afraid. I was worried about the fat man's situation, so I walked fast. When I passed by a bush, a red shadow flashed in front of me. I lifted my head and saw the red shadow standing in front of me. I was startled. Instinctively, I asked, "Why did you come out?" After asking, I remembered that the red shadow couldn't speak. I couldn't help but feel dispirited. But then, the red shadow spoke. "You don't go to that place yesterday. I can save that person." The red shadow's voice was very soft, and it seemed to stutter as if it was not used to speaking. After I heard that, I was pleasantly surprised and asked her, "Can you really save the fatty's father?" The red shadow nodded and emphasized, "Don't go to the place you went to yesterday." My excitement disappeared. Does she mean that I'm not allowed to go to the fatty's ancestral house? Then how am I supposed to save his father? I asked Red Shadow. She told me that the place I shouldn't go to was the dormitory, not the fatty's ancestral home. I felt relieved. I didn't have time to think about why the Red Shadow didn't want me to go to the dormitory. I asked her to return to the jade bracelet and rush to the fatty's place. Unexpectedly, when I arrived, I saw the fat boy's father walk out of the door. He woke up on his own. Then, the fat boy also walked out of the room. The fat boy's face looked much better than yesterday. When he saw me, he happily received the breakfast in my hand and asked his father to join us. The fat boy wanted to go inside to eat, but his father didn't let us in. He just ate his breakfast on the ground outside. I could see that the fat boy's father didn't want an outsider like me to enter his ancestral home. After breakfast, we went down the mountain together. The fat boy's father took us to the village elder's house. He said that he wanted to borrow the village elder's phone to contact someone to help us. At that time, although telephones weren't a rare thing in the countryside, not many people had telephones. Only the village elder and a few other rich families had telephones. After the call, I went home to inform my family. Then, I followed the fat boy and his father to the school. Although we had encountered some danger yesterday, the fat boy's father didn't want to let it go. Soon, we reached the school gate. The fat boy's father didn't want to enter the school. He stood at the gate as if he was waiting for someone. The fat boy and I didn't dare to ask him. We just stood behind him and waited. Not long after, a black Santana sedan came from afar. When it reached us, it stopped. The Santana was a low-end sedan, but in the 90s of the previous world, there weren't many of them in a small county. The fat boy and I couldn't help but straighten our backs. We curiously looked at the car. We thought that the person sitting inside must be an important person. Soon, the car door opened, and a small old man wearing glasses walked out. The small old man's hair was white, and even the goatee on his chin was snow white. He looked to be at least 70 years old. After he got out of the car, a middle-aged man around 30 years old got out of the driver's seat. He ran to support the old man and walked toward the fat boy's father. The old man was old, but he walked faster than a middle-aged man. He hurriedly walked up to Fatty's father and asked, "Lin Aching, is what you said on the phone true? A 30-year-old, flesh-eating baby?" I knew that the fat boy's father's surname was Lin, but it was the first time I heard someone call him by his name. The fat boy's father nodded and whispered, "Uncle He, I don't dare to lie to you. I saw it with my own eyes yesterday. It hasn't taken shape yet, but from the looks of it, it's the last shaved ghost. I was careless yesterday, and I almost lost my life. I'm sure I saw it right." From the way they addressed each other, the fat boy's father and this old man didn't have a simple relationship. It was strange. From what I remembered, the fat boy's father would only come out to attend funerals in the village. He usually stayed at home. It was hard to imagine that he had a friend like Old He in the county. The white-haired uncle, he kept silent for a while. Then he sighed and said, "A 30-year-old flesh-eating baby. Let's go. We should take advantage of the fact that we found out about it. It'll be too late if we wait any longer." After saying that, the old man went into the school first. His majestic gait was a huge contrast to his appearance. When we arrived at the school, we didn't know when the principal had received the news. Before we reached the school building, he greeted us with a face full of smiles. However, it was obvious that he wasn't smiling at us, but at the spirited old man. "President He, how come you have the time to visit me today?" The principal smiled and moved closer. His expression was even a little flattering. Old He snorted heavily. His tone wasn't polite at all. He said, "Something like this happened in your school, and as the principal, you're still trying to cover it up? Don't you care about the lives of the children?" The principal was reprimanded, but he wasn't angry at all. He just smiled bitterly and apologized. "I didn't understand the situation and thought it was a small matter. But since President He is here today, this matter is indeed a small matter." As expected of the principal, he was able to flatter Old He subtly with his words. Old He snorted again and didn't talk about it anymore. He just asked the principal to prepare a room with a bedroom. The principal didn't dare to ask too much and quickly arranged for his subordinates to find a teacher's dormitory. After this was arranged, a car drove over from the school gate. When the people got off, I realized that it was Guo Mingming's family. At this time, Guo Mingming was already unconscious. A middle-aged man was carrying him on his back. Beside him was a middle-aged woman who was constantly wiping her tears. They should be his parents. Old He arranged for Guo Mingming's family to put him on the bed in the teacher's dormitory. Then he told the middle-aged man who had been following him to stay here and watch over Guo Mingming. Then he brought us to the dormitory where the incident happened. It could be seen that everyone respected this old man a lot. The strange incident in the dormitory would probably be solved. I also felt a lot more relaxed. Originally, I was hesitant to go to the dormitory because of Red Shadow's advice. However, since there was someone who could solve the problem in the dormitory, it should be fine for me to follow them. Who knew that when we reached the dormitory, Fatty's father suddenly said that Fatty and I should go back to the classroom and not get involved in this matter. After he said that, Fatty and I couldn't follow him. Although we didn't want to, we had no choice but to go back. On the way back, Fatty suddenly stopped. "I'm worried about my dad's situation. I'm going to sneak back. Do you want to go with me?" Previously, when we went to the graveyard to steal food, the two of us were together. For the sake of brotherhood, I couldn't reject the Fatty. Moreover, I was also very curious. Without saying anything, I nodded and sneaked back with the Fatty. Our dormitory was on the 4th floor. Fatty and I sneaked up and hid between the stairs of the 3rd and 4th floor. We were afraid that someone would find us, so we didn't dare to poke our heads out. We just listened to the commotion above. After waiting for a long time, I didn't hear anything. When did Fatty's father wake up last night? After chatting with Fatty for a while, I learned that Fatty had asked his father about the glowing green ghost face in our dormitory. According to Fatty's father, there had been a murder case in our dormitory many years ago, which had given birth to a ghost. This ghost was very special. It was called the shaving ghost. Every 3 years, it would kill a person. Every time it killed someone, it would act like Guo Mingming and shave the victim's hair. After that, the victim would die within 3 days. This cycle would repeat. After 30 years, the ghost would kill 10 people and give birth to a strange, evil creature called the flesh-eating baby. The glowing green ghost face I had seen earlier was actually the flesh-eating baby that was about to take shape. This flesh-eating baby wasn't an ordinary ghost. It was an evil creature with a physical body. That was why people could see it. However, the evil face I had seen hadn't taken shape yet. Guomingming was the 10th person to be killed. Once Guomingming died, the ghost would swallow his 3 souls, and the evil face would become a real, flesh-eating baby. Chapter 8. Hearing the noise, the fatty immediately stood up and wanted to head upstairs without saying anything. I quickly pulled him back and said softly, "Fatty, don't be rash. Your dad suffered a loss yesterday, so he definitely came prepared today. Also, that old man, he is also a capable person. That shout just now might mean that they've already killed the thing inside. What's more, even if something really happened, your dad can't even take care of it. So what's the point of us rushing in? Let's go take a look first." I tried my best to persuade the fatty to come down, and the 2 of us sneaked up to the 4th floor. At this time, the principal and the head teacher were standing outside. They were probably startled by the sharp scream just now. The 2 of them were standing in front of the door, staring at the dormitory door, and seemed to be hesitating whether or not to rush in. The fatty and I hid the stairs and decided that if there was still no movement inside in 3 minutes, we would rush in. In the end, after just over a minute, the dormitory door suddenly opened, but there was no one at the door. It was as if something invisible had slammed into it. The doorknob hit the wall and made a loud dong sound. Then a gust of wind blew out from the door. This gust of wind was extremely strong. I could even hear the rapid whistling sound. The principal and the head teacher were already on tenterhooks at the door. This sudden situation caused them to fall on their butts. I don't know if they fell because of the wind or because they were scared. Seeing this, the fatty and I prepared to rush over. But then we heard Old Man he shout, "Don't come in, close the door." The principal and the head teacher crawled up from the ground in shock. The head teacher was younger, so he reacted faster. He reached into the dormitory and was about to pull the door shut. The dormitory door was the type that was pushed inwards. When the head teacher pulled the door, half of his body was inside the dormitory, but after he grabbed the door handle, he suddenly stopped moving. The principal also noticed that something was wrong and pulled the head teacher's clothes to pull him out. However, the head teacher was fat and the principal was a 50 or 60-year-old man, so he couldn't move him at all. I remembered what happened after I saw the strange face in the dormitory yesterday. The head teacher was probably also enchanted by the face. There was no way to hide, so I called the fatty and ran over. When we arrived at the entrance, the 2 of us, along with the principal, finally managed to pull the teaching director out. After rescuing him, the door to the dormitory was still open. The wind inside was blowing outside, and it was pitch black. Looking in from the outside, nothing could be seen. Then, we heard Oldie's voice urging us to close the door. His voice sounded hurried. I guess he had encountered something troublesome in there. He didn't have time to deal with us. The little fatty stood up and was about to close the door. I remembered the jade bracelet on my neck. I gritted my teeth and dashed forward. I didn't dare to look inside, so I closed my eyes and reached for the door handle. I pulled hard and closed the door. To prevent the door from opening again, I deliberately buckled the pouch on the door. I wanted to lock it, but I was afraid that something would happen to the fatty's father, so I didn't lock it. After closing the door, the 3 of us heaved a sigh of relief and turned to look at the dean. He lay on the ground, but he did not pass out. His eyes were wide open, and his body was motionless, as if his soul had been stolen. The principal called out to him for a long time, but he did not respond. Students, director, what happened to him? The principal sounded distressed. It seemed he had forgotten to ask why we had come back. Instead, he asked for our advice. Although I also experienced something like this yesterday, I couldn't tell the reason. Although the fatty was a bit stronger than me, he clearly didn't know what happened either. He could only reply to the principal, "When my dad and the others come out, director, who should be fine." The principal was panicking, but after listening to the fatty, he reacted. He nodded and asked me and the fatty to help him sit down by the railing. After settling Director Who down, I quietly took the jade bracelet off my neck and held it in my hand. I wanted to take the chance when the fatty and the principal weren't paying attention. I wanted to put the jade bracelet on Director Who's body to see if I could wake him up. However, right at this moment, a cold wind blew around us, and the light around us dimmed. It was morning, and the light was bright. We could feel the sudden change in the dark corridor. The principal lifted his head and looked around. His voice trembled. "What's going on? The door isn't open. What happened?" After the principal asked, the fatty and I didn't answer him. We just looked at the entrance of the corridor. We didn't know when a shadow had appeared there. No, it wasn't a shadow. It was just a shadow. Under the dim light of the corridor, it looked very dim. It floated and walked toward us. The fatty and I recognized it at first glance. It was Guomingming. His head was bald, and his eyes and nose were blurry. His face was dull, and he looked unreal. Looking at the Guomingming in front of me, I recalled the red shadow I had seen for the first time. However, this Guomingming was different from the red shadow. The red shadow looked solid, but this Guomingming was like a cluster of gray mist. He was so fleeting that it looked like he would vanish in the next second. As Guomingming appeared, the cold wind blew stronger. I felt as if something was stuck in my throat. I stood there, unable to say a word. My reaction wasn't bad. After all, I had seen the red shadow before. It was the first time the principal had encountered such a thing. He was standing next to the dean, but now he leaned against the railing and slid to the ground. He pointed at Guomingming. His eyes were wide open, and his mouth was wide open. However, he could only make noises. He couldn't say a word. Right at this moment, the dormitory door that I had just closed suddenly squeaked. It seemed that someone was trying to pull the door. The lock on the door was stuck, and it made a sharp grinding sound. Before I could react, the fatty ran toward the door. While running, he shouted, "That's Guomingming's soul. Third baby, come and help me hold the door. We can't let Guomingming's soul get in." The fatty had told me that the evil face in the dormitory would eat Guomingming's 3 souls. Then it would become a real carnivorous baby. After hearing the fatty shout, I dashed forward. When I reached the door, the fatty had already grabbed the door handle. I hurried to remove the lock on the handle and try to lock it into the keyhole. However, the door was shaking violently. I tried a few times, but I couldn't lock it. In the end, I gave up and grabbed the door handle. Together with the fatty, we pulled the door. When we pulled the door, Guomingming didn't stop walking. He walked step by step along the corridor. At this moment, he was standing next to us. To be honest, because of the red shadow, I wasn't afraid of the evil face in the dormitory. However, when I saw Guomingming in the mist, I was scared. A few days ago, I had seen Guomingming in the flesh, but now I saw his soul. This feeling of fear was really strong. Guomingming didn't stop. He almost bumped into me and the fatty. I couldn't help but loosen my grip on the door handle. I moved backward toward the door. Right at this moment, a huge force that was much stronger than before came from the door. With a ka-ba sound, the iron door pouch fell off from the wooden door. The dormitory's door was violently pulled open, and even the fatty and I were dragged along as we fell onto the floor inside the dormitory. When the door opened, the hazy Guomingming walked in. Hissing noises came from inside the dormitory. I didn't care about Guomingming's soul and lifted my head to look. The fatty's father was sitting cross-legged on the ground, not far from us. In front of him was a row of small coffins. They were the same as the one I had seen before. They were all bright red. In his hand, he was holding a handful of white powder and throwing it into the dormitory. Further away from us was Old He. He was walking in strange steps. His left hand was making hand seals, while his right hand was holding something that looked like a peachwood sword. He was chanting something. Oldie didn't talk when he saw Guomingming's soul following us. However, his chanting became faster and faster. Between Old He and the fatty's father was a naked, blood-red baby. Its face was the same as the fluorescent green face I had seen yesterday. It was twisted and ferocious, with 2 vertical eyes. What was different was that the mouth that had previously revealed an evil smile was now wide open, revealing 2 rows of cold, sharp teeth that were extremely frightening. The hissing noises I had heard earlier came from its mouth. This blood baby should be the flesh-eating baby that the fatty had told me about. Its eyes gazed at the Guamingming who had just walked in. Then it dashed forward. However, when it reached the row of coffins in front of the fatty's father, it seemed to bump into something and bounce back. But soon, it dashed toward us again. The powder in the fatty's father's hand fell on the blood baby. It quickly turned into a puddle of dark red liquid that flowed to the ground. Oldie was holding something that looked like a peachwood sword. Every time he swung it, the blood baby was slapped to the ground. The dark liquid splashed from its body. Chapter 9. The fat man had told me that the blood baby wasn't fully formed yet. It had to eat Guamingming's 3 souls before it could become a real carnivorous baby. Old He and the others were having a hard time dealing with the blood baby. If we waited until it ate Guamingming's soul, I was afraid that all of us would be in big trouble. We had to stop it. I understood it, but I was so scared that my limbs had gone soft. I couldn't get up no matter how hard I tried. The fat man wasn't afraid of anything. His eyes reddened, and he got up from the ground. He stormed forward and tried to hug Guamingming's soul. Who would have thought that he would grab onto nothing, and his hands would directly pass through Guamingming's soul? A soul was an illusory object. How could a fat man hug it? The fat man was bewildered. Guamingming's soul took a few steps forward and stood in front of the coffins. He was just one wall away from the blood baby. Right at this moment, the blood baby screeched. Black mist burst out of its body. Then it opened its mouth at an exaggerated angle and bit forward. A cracking sound rang out, and the invisible barrier around the small coffin seemed to have been torn apart. The blood infant hissed as it poked its head out of the coffin, then opened its mouth to chomp down on Guamingming's soul. Evil creature. Oldie's angry roar came from behind us. Then a white light descended from the sky and slashed at the blood baby. At the same time, the fat man's father got up from the ground. He shouted at the fat man and me, "Attack together! Don't let it bite this soul. Otherwise, we won't be able to save your classmate." While talking, he used the small wooden coffin in his hand to hit the blood baby's head. At the same time, the fat man stormed forward. He found a mop from somewhere and crazily hit the blood baby. They were all attacking. I didn't know where my courage came from, but I gritted my teeth and got up from the ground. I ran toward the blood baby. Old He, the fat man, and his son attacked at the same time. The blood baby fell to the ground. Black water gushed from its body, forming a puddle on the ground. However, this did not stop it. The blood infant seemed to have infinite strength. Soon, it bounced up from the ground and continued to rush toward Guamingming's soul. When Old Man He saw this, he took out a brush from somewhere and started drawing in the air. At the same time, he chanted loudly, "The art of Taishang receives me. The heart of jade blood transforms." As he finished his last sentence, a ball of flame appeared on the wooden sword in his hand. Almost in an instant, the wooden sword slashed down. The blood infant squeaked as half of its body was set ablaze. It could be seen that Old Man He had used all his strength. After this strike, he sat down on the ground and stopped moving. However, the blood infant didn't stop moving. It screamed as it moved toward Guamingming's soul. Seeing this, the fat father and son also threw the things in their hands at the blood infant. At this moment, I dashed toward the fat father. Since I didn't have anything in my hands, I clenched my jaw and punched the blood infant. Unexpectedly, the blood infant's footsteps halted when I punched it. Right after that, it let out an unprecedented shriek. The left side of its face that had been hit by my fist instantly melted, turning into a puddle of black liquid that flowed downwards. Before it could reach the ground, it was burned into nothingness by the flames on its body. At this moment, the blood infant seemed to be scared. It stopped moving toward Guamingming's soul and lifted its head. It gazed at us with its remaining right eye for a while. Then, it turned around and dashed out of the room. I lifted my head to look outside. The principal was craning his neck to look inside the room. The blood infant dashed past him, and the principal saw it. He slumped back to the ground. The blood infant had run away. Besides me, the fight had exhausted everyone. The fat father and his son were in the same state as old he. They were panting and sitting on the ground. No one said anything, but the fat man's father squinted and looked at me suspiciously. I was also surprised. Although Oldie's attack was powerful, I knew that half of the blood infant's body had been destroyed because of my punch. Since when did my punch become so powerful? I lowered my head and saw that the hand that had hit the blood infant was holding the jade bracelet that belonged to the red shadow. I remembered that I had taken the jade bracelet off my neck when I was trying to save the dean. Everything had happened too fast, and I had been holding the jade bracelet in my hand the whole time. I hadn't noticed it when I was hitting the blood infant. Was it because of the jade bracelet? The fat father looked at me for a while, then turned to ask old he, "Uncle he, the blood infant has run away. What should we do now?" Oldie sat there and panted for a while. Then he said in a tired voice, "This flesh-eating baby is strange. Although it hasn't fully formed, it's as powerful as a fully formed flesh-eating baby. I tried my best, but I could only hurt it. I couldn't capture it." The fat man's father nodded and didn't look at me. He also thought that Oldie was the one who had hurt the blood infant and not me. "Old man," he spoke again, "let's rest for a while. The blood infant has been severely injured, and there will definitely be traces of Inchi on the way back. Later on, we'll follow the Inchi, and we'll definitely be able to find its hiding place." After making up his mind, he sat cross-legged on the ground and closed his eyes. He didn't talk anymore, as if he was trying to recover his energy. The fat man's father turned to him and asked, "I told you too to go back to class. Why did you still follow us?" The fat man and I lowered our heads guiltily. We didn't dare to talk. The fat man's father said, "Rest for a while and then go back. Don't follow us blindly." Before he could finish his words, Oldie opened his eyes and interrupted him. "These two brats have some guts. Why let them go back? If it weren't for these two kids today, we might have to die here. You two don't leave. Take a break and follow me later. We'll meet that flesh-eating baby again." The fat man and I cheered up. Although the previous experience had shaken us, people were curious. Of course, we wanted to go and see. Shortly after, Oldie got up from the ground and walked toward Guomingming's soul. After the blood infant had run away, Guomingming's soul hovered in the same spot. However, his body was dimmer than before. It looked like he could vanish at any minute. Walking up to Guomingming's soul, Oldie took out a small yellow paper doll from his body, then took out the brush he had just used and a box of something that looked like red ink. The fat man had told me that it was cinnabar. After everything was ready, Oldie asked for Guomingming's birth information. Yesterday, when we came, the fat man's father had asked for Guomingming's birth information. Of course, he remembered it, so he told Oldie. After Oldie wrote down Guomingming's birth date in 8 characters on the little paper doll. He tapped it with his left index finger and thumb, and the little paper doll stuck to his finger. Then, he pointed the yellow paper at Guomingming's body and muttered a few words. Guomingming's soul disappeared in an instant, and the originally yellow paper man became somewhat gray, just like Guomingming's soul from before. After everything was done, he called us, and we walked out of the dormitory. Outside the dormitory, the principal pulled a long face. He looked at us as if we were his family. "President Brother Lin, you're finally out? What was that thing?" It was bloody and scarred. It was scary. He waved his hand. It seemed he didn't want to talk to him. He pointed at the teaching director, who was still sitting on the ground, and asked, "What happened?" The principal told him everything that had happened. Oldie closed his eyes and formed a seal with his fingers. He chanted in a mysterious manner and waved his hand in the air a few times. Then he pointed at the dean's head, his eye socket, and his philtrum. Then he shouted, "Return!" The teaching director, who had a blank face, suddenly shivered. His eyes started to shine. This made me feel that he was really capable. The fatty's father had been hit and had to stay in his family's ancestral house for a night to recover. Now that the headmaster was here, he could easily wake him up. It was obvious that he was much more powerful than the fatty's father. Then, Oldie told the teaching director not to sleep too much for the next 2 days. He also told him not to go to places with lots of trees. When we were about to go to the principal's office, the middle-aged man that Oldie had sent to the teacher's dormitory to take care of Guo Mingming rushed over and said apologetically to Old He, "President, I didn't manage to lock down that child's soul. Is everything okay on your side?" I remembered now. No wonder Old He had sent someone to watch over Guo Mingming. He had already predicted this. But this person didn't do his job well and almost caused an accident on our side. Oldie pulled a long face and looked angry. He asked the person, "How did you lock his soul?" "I used the soul-locking knot. I also used black threads to seal the top of his head and the bottom of his feet." Seeing that Oldie was angry, the person lowered his head and answered honestly. Oldie's face looked better. He nodded and said, "This blood baby's cultivation was beyond my expectations. It's normal that you couldn't protect it. Take this paper doll and stick it on the child's head. Use the soul drawing not to send the soul back." As he spoke, Oldie handed him the paper doll from before. After that, Oldie brought us to the principal's office and told the principal to investigate the school's files. Before this year, he had to sort out all the student deaths that had occurred in the past 3 years. The principal's office was very efficient. He quickly found all the deaths that had occurred in the school. After sorting it out, it was indeed as the fatty had said. From today onwards, there would be student deaths every 3 years. However, the way they died was different. Some died from illness, while others died from accidents. That's why no one had investigated further. After looking through the files, we ate at the school's cafeteria under the principal's lead. In the afternoon, Old He called us to go out of the school. Along the way, Old He led the way. We took many turns, but we didn't know where he found the way. Finally, we arrived at the back of the school, at the foot of a mountain about 5 kilometers away. There was a small mound near the foot of the mountain. There was a stone tablet in front of the mound. Oldie nodded and said, "It's here." We walked over and pushed aside the weeds in front of the stone tablet. There was a row of words written on it. Tumuli Li Anbong and Li Ying. Looking at those words, Old He frowned. The fatty and I exchanged glances with each other. Chapter 10. I wasn't the only one who thought it was strange. The fat man's father and Old He were both experienced and knowledgeable, so it was hard for them to understand the father and daughter's grave. The two of them walked around the gravestone, but they didn't say anything. They just frowned and thought about something. I couldn't hold back my curiosity. I pointed at the gravestone and asked the fat man's father, "Uncle Lin, why are there 2 people buried in this grave? Moreover, their seniority is different. Is there something wrong with the gravestone?" Before the fat man's father could answer, Old He reached out and patted my arm. "Kid, respect the dead. No matter if they're dead or alive, you have to respect them. If you randomly point at people, you might get beaten up. If you randomly point at people's graves, you have to be careful of offending them." Oldie's face was stiff, as if he was scolding someone. I was so scared that I didn't dare to speak. Then, he lifted his head and looked at the grave in front of us. He sighed and said, "There are 2 bursts of resentful energy above the grave. The 2 people buried here can't be bad. No wonder they gave birth to this flesh-eating baby. I wonder how many sins they committed when they were alive." The fat man's father took over and asked, "Uncle He, should we touch the grave today?" Oldie shook his head. Although this flesh-eating baby was greatly damaged, the resentful energy gathered above the grave is something I've rarely seen in my life. We can't rashly touch it. We should seal the grave first. When we get back, we'll investigate the father and daughter, Li Anbong and Li Ying. We'll see if we can resolve the resentful energy first. Then, Old He arranged for us to work together and clean the weeds on the grave. When we pulled the weeds, I noticed that the leaves were green, but the roots and stems were black. Old He also saw that. He shook his head and sighed. The resentful energy is really high. After we finished cleaning the weeds, Old He took out a black line that looked like a carpenter's tool. He used his feet to step on the ground in a few spots. Then, he and the fat man's father worked together to trace the spots that they had stepped on. They created crisscrossing black lines on the grave mound. However, the mound was pitch black, so the lines weren't very obvious. Not to mention, looking from afar, they couldn't be seen even if we got close. After that, Old He was relieved. He clapped his hands and brought us back. On the way back, Oldie didn't call anyone to pick us up. Instead, he walked slowly along the road we had come from. When he saw people, he smiled and asked for water from them. When he met older people, he would even brag about everything for a while. I always thought he was a grumpy old man who always wore a stern face. I didn't expect him to have such a gentle side. Then, I met an old woman who claimed that she had lived in this village for 70 or 80 years. Oldie asked people about Li Onbong's name. That was when I understood that he had started to investigate that grave. The old woman's teeth had all fallen out, but she was still peeling peanuts to eat. No one knew how she ate them. Hearing Li Onbong's name, the old woman squinted her eyes and tried to recall for a long time before she asked with uncertainty, "Do you think this person is from a nearby village?" Everyone in this area has the surname Chun. Not far from here, half of the village has the surname Wang, and the other half has the surname Xie. There are a few families with the surname Li in Quoto village, but I know all of them. I don't see anyone with the surname Onbong. Then, the old woman emphasized her authority. "My family is from Quoto village. I'm sure it's him." "Brother, why do you want to know about this person?" Oldie wasn't in a hurry. He smiled casually and said, "I met a friend here a few years ago. I haven't seen him for 20 or 30 years, so I came back to look for him. I thought he lived here, but it seems he's not from this area. Sorry to trouble you." I didn't know why the old woman sounded emotional. She pouted her lips and said, "If you have unfinished business, you should hurry up and do it when you're young. Don't regret it when it's done. Things will remain the same, but people will be different." Oldie sighed and agreed. The more they talked, the more they got along. In the end, the granny's family asked us to stay for dinner. However, Oldie refused. When we were about to leave, the old woman's son walked us to the door. The old woman was at least 70 or 80 years old. Her son also had gray hair. He looked like he was over 50 years old. After he walked us out, he hesitated and pulled Oldie. "Uncle, I seem to have some impression of the person you mentioned to my mother just now." As soon as he said that, not only Oldie, but me, the fat man, and my son also turned to look at him. The old woman's son was startled by our gazes. His honest face became even more awkward. He explained with a guilty conscience, "I don't remember him clearly. I'm not sure if he's the person you're talking about." "Old man," he smiled reassuringly and patted him on the shoulder. "Tell me if it's right or not. I'll go ask again." In the end, the old woman's son gave us an answer. He said that when he was still in school, the principal of the county's second high school was called Li Onbong. The county's second high school was the school that the fat man and I were studying at. After listening to him, we were almost certain that it was him. This strange thing happened in our school. If the old principal was called Li Onbong, then the person in the father and daughter's grave must be him. After saying goodbye to the old woman's family, Oldie didn't ask around anymore. He brought us back to the school. On the way back, we were in a hurry. After a busy day, we should be very tired. However, Oldie walked in the front as if nothing had happened. Young people like us couldn't keep up with him. When we returned to the school, we told the principal. The principal was a little confused. He shook his head and said that he didn't know much about the old principal. He needed to investigate. After the incident in the morning, the dean had already gone home to rest. It wasn't good to let too many people know about this matter. In the end, the principal ran around and found a lot of dusty files. According to the school's files, Li Onbong was indeed the old principal. In 1964, he had come to our small, backward county as an intellectual who had come to support the Western region. At that time, he had been the only principal of the county's high school. His file had been recorded until July 1972. After that, there was nothing. However, it was strange that there was no record of the next principal after 72 years. It wasn't until 76 years later that there was a new principal. It had been a long time, and the teachers in the school had been replaced several times. The principal had been transferred from another place, so he didn't know much about the events that had happened that year. Although it was almost nighttime, the principal hadn't found anyone who knew about the events that year. He had to let it go for now. Oldie took us back to the dormitory. He said that he needed to clean the place first. After the blood baby left, as long as the energy in the dormitory was expelled, it wouldn't harm the students anymore. On the way to the dormitory, we met Annie Chun, the administrator of the dormitory. Old women like to nag. When we first came here a few days ago, Annie Chun didn't know what was going on. But these days, she noticed that we had been coming and going frequently. She felt that something was wrong, so she kept asking questions. Of course, and we didn't say anything about it. Only the principal kept talking to her. Before we reached the dormitory, the principal casually asked about the old principal, Leon Bong. Annie Chun halted, her face changing dramatically. He was the first to notice her expression. He stopped and turned to ask her, "You know about Leon Bong?" Annie Chun's face paled. She didn't answer his question. Is the school's case related to the old principal? It's hard to say. We just want to investigate. He looked calm. He wasn't in a hurry. Annie Chun kept silent for a while. Eventually, she nodded. We weren't in a hurry to clean the dormitory anymore. The principal asked Annie Chun to open the door to her room. We went in and sat on the bed. Annie Chun started to talk about something that had happened in this school. Our county second high school was still called County High School. It was the only high school in the county. It was established in 1964, and Leon Bong was the first principal. He was from Jiangsu. He joined the army during the Revolutionary era. After the revolution, he went to university and became an intellectual. In the 60s, he responded to the country's plan to support the Western region. He brought his daughter from Shanghai and came to our small county. At that time, people had a passion for revolution. Leon Bong lost his parents during the war, and his wife died when he was young. The fact that he could bring his daughter here proved that he had decided to take root in education in our poor mountainous area. In fact, he did it. He founded the first high school in the county. He worked hard to bring in teachers and trained countless high school students for our county. In this era, high school students weren't much. But at that time, the number of high school students was much smaller than today's university students. The knowledge they learned was more complex and comprehensive. As long as they could graduate from high school and enter society, they could even become a civil servant. What happened next was like many cliché stories. In that special era, a peaceful revolutionary movement broke out. This movement started in Beijing and gradually spread to the rest of the country. The main force was the high school students. The county's high school, which had only been established for a few years, also responded to this movement. However, our county was remote. When this movement officially started, it was already in the 70s. At that time, there were two people who led this movement. One was Feng Qianjun, and the other was Chun Jiangwo. Both of them were in the third year of high school. They each formed two student organizations. One was called the First Command, or First Division. The other was called the Proletariat Joint Action Committee, or Linkage. After these two student organizations were officially established, they started the movement of knock down all the evils and get rid of the 5 evils. The school also stopped classes. Chapter 11. At that time, there were very few people who could receive formal education, and those who could become high school teachers were at least from wealthy families. The teachers in our school were all senior intellectuals that Principal Lee had invited from Shanghai. He used his connections to invite them, and they all came from good backgrounds. It was quite chaotic at that time, and the teachers were pulled down from the podium one by one. The female teachers had their hair cut, and the male teachers were put on the wall. Of course, Principal Leon Bong did not belong to the Black Five. He had been a revolutionary, and he was from a decent red background. However, he did not feel good. He had invited these young teachers from Shanghai one by one. Now that things had become like this, he could not face these people who had helped him with enthusiasm. In the beginning, when the students were making a scene, Principal Lee would rush over to disperse the students and rescue the teachers. In the end, almost all the teachers were arrested, and the student organization took control of the entire school. Up to this point, Principal Leon Bong was still fine. Although he had gone against the students many times, out of respect for his identity as an old revolutionary, and out of respect for his achievements in building the high school for many years, no one dared to do anything to him. The one who brought disaster to him was his daughter, Li Ying. When the old principal came to the county, Li Ying was still a 10-year-old girl. When the students were making a scene, Li Ying had grown into an 18-year-old girl. At that time, people studied late, and Li Ying was also a student in the county high school. Coincidentally, Feng Qianjun and Chen Jiangwo were in the same class as Li Ying. Li Ying, who came from Shanghai, had been beautiful since she was a child. She had the unique temperament of a city person, and she was different from all the girls in this remote county. When she grew up, she became more and more beautiful, and naturally attracted the eyes of all the boys around her. At that time, the two students who were in the limelight naturally stared at her. Li Ying, who had received a good family education, naturally would not be nice to them. After being rejected by Li Ying countless times, one day, Li Onbong, who had never been harassed by the students, was also in trouble. On the surface, Feng Qianjun and Chen Jiangwo did not appear, and it was just a group of ordinary students who did it. But in fact, everyone knew that they were forcing Li Ying to submit. For a woman, they did not care about the old principal's status and identity. From that day onwards, Li Onbong was like all the other teachers. At this moment, the ignorant Li Ying finally understood why his father had suffered such humiliation and harm after being reminded by the kind-hearted person. What happened next was not difficult to guess. Li Ying could not watch his most respected father, who had raised him, lose his dignity and be wantonly insulted by his own students because of him. Therefore, Li Ying decided to look for Feng Qianjun and Chen Jiangwo. In the heart of this innocent little girl, she felt that as long as she humbled herself and agreed to date Feng Qianjun or Chen Jiangwo, her father would be released. And the two of them would either escape back to Shanghai or find a place to hide for a while. Moreover, Feng Qianjun and Chen Jiangwo both liked her. Since they loved her, they wouldn't go too far. Unfortunately, what she didn't know was that a crazy person wouldn't have such a pure thing like love in their heart. Although he had suffered unimaginable humiliation, the children in the school were all recruited by him one by one. In this barren county, he had to run all over the fields of the county every summer, telling the students' parents the meaning of education over and over again to urge them to continue to support their children's studies. As for some students from poor families, their living expenses for the whole year were almost all supported by his frugal salary. Because of this, he believed that these children were just led astray. They were not bad in nature. As long as he worked harder, these children would eventually come back to their senses. However, Ling didn't think so much. She just looked at the wound on her father's neck that had been strangled and saw the spit on her father's face. She felt extremely guilty when she recalled that it was all because of her. Therefore, after dinner, she quietly got up and went to the school's auditorium. Before entering the auditorium, she heard a burst of crazy shouting inside. Li Ying frowned and walked in to find Feng Qianjun. Not wanting to see Feng Qianjun's surprised expression, Li Ying just lowered her head and told him, "I agree to your pursuit. Don't look for my father anymore." Feng Qianjun's dream had finally come true, so he was naturally extremely happy. He promised that he wouldn't harm the old principal anymore and would stop Jiang Wo-chun. Feng Qianjun was more powerful than Jiang Wo-chun. As long as he was willing, he could naturally guarantee the old principal's safety. This was also the reason why Li Ying chose to look for Feng Qianjun. Li Ying didn't want to stay in this filthy place any longer. After getting his promise, she decided to leave. However, at this moment, Feng Qianjun pulled her back. "I've already agreed to your request. What else do you want?" Li Ying didn't want to stay with this person for another second. Feng Qianjun smiled and invited Li Ying to join their organization. He asked her to stay and learn the spirit of socialism with everyone. Of course, Li Ying refused to comply. After a while, Feng Qianjun probably understood that Li Ying was just being perfunctory. He had always gotten whatever he wanted, and he had even controlled the entire school. He couldn't stand it anymore and slapped Li Ying in the face. Li Ying covered her face and raised her head in disbelief. What greeted her was a pair of scarlet eyes from Feng Qianjun. Next, the female students in the auditorium all left, leaving behind more than a dozen core backbone members. More than a dozen madmen's eyes were as red as Feng Qianjun's. Feng Qianjun and Zhang Wochun weren't the only ones who had been pursuing Li Ying. In the hot summer night, the cicadas screamed hysterically. Lian Bong lay on the bed, sweating all over her body. The wounds on her body were burning with pain. She couldn't fall asleep, so she simply got up and wrote down the words she had thought of to persuade them the next day on a piece of paper. Her memory wasn't as good as her age. The words she had just thought of were very reasonable and convincing. She couldn't delay those children. At 10 o'clock in the middle of the night, Zhang Wo-chun, who was in the small auditorium of the Proletariat Joint Action Committee headquarters, received the news of Li Ying. He was burning with jealousy. Without saying anything, he rushed to the auditorium with more than a dozen backbone members. The scene in front of him made Zhang Wo-chun, who had seen countless absurd scenes in the past 2 years, widen his eyes. However, there was no pity in his heart. Instead, like Feng Qianjun, his eyes were red. In this hot summer night, the cicadas' cries didn't stop until late at night. It was like the absurd scenes that happened in the human world. It seemed that they had also gone crazy. The next morning, before dawn, the old principal was awakened by the heat. His tired body made him unwilling to get up. He endured until 6 o'clock in the morning. The sun couldn't be seen in the gloomy sky, but it was even hotter. When the distant star hid behind the clouds, it could emit even more terrifying heat. The old principal, who had prepared breakfast, felt a little strange. His daughter, who had always gotten up early in the past few days, didn't know why she slept until now. So, he went over and knocked on Li Ying's door. No one responded after knocking once, and still no one responded after knocking a second time. The old principal finally panicked. After finding the key to open the door, he found that Li Ying wasn't in the room. Ignoring the breakfast that he had just prepared, the old principal rushed out of the house and asked everyone he saw about Li Ying. Logically speaking, it was just a night out. Even if Li Ying was a girl, the old principal shouldn't be so nervous. However, the experience of the past few days made him understand that he was in a crazy era and anything could happen. Everyone who was asked had a strange expression. They wanted to say something but couldn't. Their expressions were full of pity. This made the old principal even more panicked. Finally, the old principal found Li Ying on the school playground. She was naked and her body was in a mess. However, she didn't cry. Instead, she laughed happily, holding a branch in her hand, and sang a children's song while jumping up and down. It was as if she had returned to the time when she had first come to this county. Her eyes were filled with novel things in the countryside, and the people she met were all people who showed respect to her father. The old principal took her home and put on her clothes. However, a few minutes later, she ran to the street again, took off her clothes one by one, and hugged everyone she passed by. The extremely hot weather lasted for 3 days, and the cicadas in the tree also crazily cried for 3 days and 3 nights. On the morning of the 4th day, the school bell that hadn't rung for many days suddenly rang. The rapid ringing of the bell woke people up from the heat and gathered under the iron bell in front of the school building. Then, they saw Li Ying hanging under the flagpole. This beautiful girl from Shanghai was dressed very neatly. She was as beautiful as any other day except for the previous 3 days, but her eyes were closed. The old principal didn't say a word. He knelt under the flagpole and kowtowed again and again. The blood on his head had long been stained with dust and stuck to his face, making him look like a ghost. Naturally, the proletarian students were not afraid of this appearance. However, they were afraid of the old principal's eyes that shot out from his blood-stained eyes every time he got up. They were afraid of the words that came out of the old principal's dusty mouth. Why? What's wrong with me coming here to run a school? What's wrong with me bringing you to school one by one? What's wrong with me teaching you knowledge and culture? I ask you, what's wrong with me? Even if I'm wrong, what's wrong with my daughter? Yes, I'm wrong. I shouldn't have taught you a group of animals. How did a group of good children become animals? Chapter 12. The heavy rain finally poured down. Hundreds of people surrounded the flagpole, solemnly, as if they were in the middle of a flag-raising ceremony. No one dared to move, and no one dared to leave. Only the old principal was still kowtowing. His speed was getting slower and slower. With every kowtow, he would ask why, as if he was asking the heavens, but also as if he was asking himself. The wound on his forehead, which had long been damaged, widened as it collided with the cement floor. Blood gushed out like a torrential downpour, mixing with the rain. Soon, a large patch of blood was dyed red as it floated in front of the crowd. Finally, some people retreated. They did not dare to step on the old principal's blood. The crowd retreated again and again until they finally stopped at the school gates. The old principal finally stopped moving. His head was on the ground, and his face was buried deep in the pool of blood. It was as if he was too ashamed to face his daughter, who was currently hanging on the flagpole and bathing in the rain. It was as if he was hiding something. There were only a few hundred students in the county high school, so the campus was naturally not big. At that moment, the old principal's blood mixed with the rain and floated to every corner of the campus. Feng Qianjun, who had been hiding in the auditorium, appeared. He led a group of people, stepped on the old headmaster's blood, and rushed to the front of the flag platform. He extended his leg and kicked the old headmaster's ribs. Lian Bong was kicked over, and he lay flat on the ground. He was long dead, but his eyes were wide open and bloodshot. It was as if the last bit of blood in his body had all surged into his eyes, and they were so red that they were almost black. Feng Qianjun had already raised his leg again, but he could not bring it down no matter what. He ordered the others to collect the old principal and his daughter's corpses in a low voice before leaving in a hurry. The old principal and his daughter were buried in a piece of barren land behind school. When the school was first built, the old principal had told others that when he passed away, he would be buried here. That way, he could lie in the ground and look at the school that he had poured his heart and soul into, as well as the children in the school. Now, the old headmaster's wish had come true. However, at the time, he would never have imagined that he was not the only one buried in this wasteland. His daughter was also buried there. At the end of the story, Annie Chen's face was covered in tears. She choked and said, "Since that day, almost half of the students in the school dropped out, including me. I was in my second year of high school. After I dropped out, I stayed at home and worked as a farmer. At that time, I thought I would never be able to go to this school again. Who knew that after half my life had passed, I would come here again? Actually, since yesterday, I felt that it might have something to do with what happened back then, but I didn't dare to tell you and I didn't dare to think about it." At this point, Annie Chen almost broke down. She sobbed and continued, "I was in the auditorium that night. When Feng Qianjun asked us to leave, everyone knew what would happen, but no one stopped them, and no one reached out to help the girl. No one, not even me, the fatty, and I were crying and clenching our fists. Our hearts were filled with hatred, but we didn't know how to vent it. Fatty's father also took out the tobacco pot that he always carried with him and slowly filled it with smoke. Only Oldie was still calm. He sighed and waited for Annie Chun to calm down. Then he asked hesitantly, 'After that day, nothing strange happened?' Annie Chun stopped crying. She had a strange expression on her face. There seemed to be a faint smile on her face, but her pupils shrunk. After a while, she let out a breath and said, 'How could it not be? What people do? The heavens are watching. Sooner or later, the heavens will still give retribution.' That rain lasted for 7 days. It's been a few decades, and I've never seen such heavy rain again. On the 7th night, the water even washed away the old headmaster's grave. Both father and daughter's bodies were soaked, but their eyes were still wide open. No one in the school dared to go and fill the old headmaster's grave. No one even dared to walk in that direction. It was also from that night onwards that the 20 or so bastards in the auditorium all started to have headaches. They screamed in pain and even pulled out their hair. After pulling out their hair, they started to hit their heads against the wall. It was as if they didn't care about their lives, as if that would make them feel better. Those few days, the entire school was filled with their screams and banging against the wall. Everyone said that they were kowtowing to the old headmaster to apologize. And in the end, they all ended up like the old headmaster, hitting themselves to death. A total of 28 people, not a single one was missing. Hearing the final outcome, I didn't know why, but I felt a little relieved. These people weren't humans at all. They were just a bunch of demons. Perhaps death was the best ending for them. For some reason, Oldie's expression didn't relax at all. Instead, it became even more serious. He frowned and asked Annie Chun, "At that time, didn't the people in the school find someone to take a look at this?" "They did." "Why didn't they find someone?" From a moment those people started to have headaches, everyone felt that something was wrong, and started to find people who knew about this. But in that era, everyone talked about breaking the feudal superstition. Those who understood these things were tortured to the point of no longer being human. The things passed down by their ancestors were all gone, and no one dared to show them. In the end, they found a foreign doctor, which is what we call Western medicine now. After diagnosing them, they said that they were suffering from mania and even gave the medicine, but no one believed them. Even after taking the medicine, it didn't have any effect. In the end, someone who knew about this came to find them, but by then, those 20 or so people had already died. Oldie stood up and walked slowly in circles along the corridor in the dormitory. His frown deepened, as though he was thinking about a difficult problem. In the middle of this, the headmaster interrupted and asked him what we should do next. Oldie raised his hand to interrupt him, but he didn't answer and continued to pace around. After a long time, he stopped and asked Annie Chun, "What about the old headmaster's grave? Did the person who came last arrange for it to be moved away?" Annie Chun narrowed her eyes and thought for a while. She nodded and said, "I heard that it was arranged by that person. That person was also very capable." After the old headmaster's grave was moved away, the school settled down, and nothing strange happened all these years, until now. Oldie nodded and asked again, "What about the other 28 people who died?" Annie Chun was stunned, and she said uncertainly, "I've never heard of that. They should have been taken away by their families to be buried." "Then do you still remember what that expert looked like and where he was from?" Oldie asked more urgently this time. Annie Chun shook her head and said, "I have a vague impression of his face, but he wasn't from around here. I've never seen him before. After that incident, I haven't seen him again. I'm sure he wasn't from around here." Oldie nodded and didn't ask Annie Chun anymore. Instead, he told the headmaster to bring us to the dormitory and clean it up as soon as possible so that the students would have a place to stay at night. Then, Oldie brought Fatty's father to our dormitory. Fatty and I wanted to follow them, but Oldie stopped us. "The energy in the dormitory is thick, and it's not good for us to go in." I felt regretful, but they didn't close the door after they entered the dormitory. I stood outside, and I could still see the situation inside. Oldie didn't do anything. He only took out something that looked like a mugwort leaf and instructed Fatty's father to use it to sweep the dormitory wall. Then he took out a yellowish vertical strip of paper and pasted it on the wall above the dormitory door. Then he specially asked the principal to find a wooden plank and nail and pass it in. He and Fatty's father busied themselves for half a day before nailing the wooden plank onto the yellow paper. That was it. After we left, Oldie told the headmaster that the dormitory would be empty for one more day. The students would be able to come back tomorrow. Also, we had to stick the yellow paper on the wall. We couldn't let the students touch it. The matter with the dormitory was settled. Next, Oldie brought Fatty's father to the old principal's grave. I thought that he would let Fatty and I go back to class. Who knew that he would ask us to take the two of us with him before he left? As soon as he said that, the two of us eagerly followed him. When they came out of the dormitory, they bumped into Annie Chun again. Auntie Chun said hesitantly to Oldie, "Uncle, I know the perpetrator this time is the old principal, but the old principal suffered too much when he was alive. If it's possible, can you give the old principal a better ending? I know you're a capable man." Oldie nodded. "Of course, I understand." Then he sighed. "However, the old headmaster wasn't the one who did this." I didn't understand. The blood baby ran to the old headmaster's grave. If it wasn't the old headmaster who did this, who else could it be? Oldie didn't want to talk more. He took the lead and left the dormitory building. When we left the school, the headmaster gave Oldie a stack of money. It was all 100 renminbi bills. My eyes widened. This stack of money was at least 3,000 or 4,000. Back then, Our annual school fees were only 100-something. We had never seen so much money before. I couldn't help but look at old he in a different light. He was able to gather so much money in just 2 days. No wonder he always used the Santana to travel. Oldie didn't stand on ceremony and took the money. But after he took it, he handed it to Fatty's father and asked him to accept it. Fatty's father chuckled. Our family worships the god of death. You're going to harm me by giving me this money. Oldie then stopped and took the money. Then he brought us to the father and daughter's grave. This time, we didn't have to run anymore. Oldie drove the Santana and brought us to the place in no time. The last time I came, I felt terrified when I saw the grave and the blood baby. But this time, I felt sad when I saw the old headmaster's grave. Even if there was a demon buried in the grave, it was forced by someone else. This time, Oldie didn't study anything else. He said, "Open the grave." Then he got to work. The middle-aged driver took the tool from the car and started to dig the grave. Fatty's father worked with him. Even old he, who was old, joined in. But when Fatty and I wanted to help, they wouldn't let us. Oldie's body was sturdier than a young man's, and the middle-aged man was also very strong. Not long after the three of them dug, the grave was opened. There was a coffin inside, but it was already rotten. When we poked it, the bones inside were revealed. The blood baby that I had imagined didn't appear. Soon, they cleared the bones. Before old he could say anything, Fatty's father realized something was wrong. He said, "Why is there only one person's skeleton?" Oldie's face darkened. He shook his head. "This isn't the old headmaster's grave." "Not the old headmaster's grave? Then why are there memorial tablets for the father and daughter?" Chapter 13. The fat man's father was a coroner, and he had seen a lot of dead people. When a village was building houses, he was the one who handled all the corpses they dug up. It wasn't a problem for him to put the bones back together. The middle-aged man wasn't an ordinary person either. He didn't say anything and went to pick up the bones. Only the fat man and I looked at the human bones in their hands and felt our scalps go numb. The three of us worked together and quickly put together a complete human body. Then I noticed that there was an intact arm bone on the ground after we finished putting it together. The fat man rolled his eyes and asked me, "Third baby, did this person have 3 arms?" I pouted. "He's not a monster. How could he have 3 arms? I guess there are 2 people buried here. It's just that we didn't dig up the other one's bones." I was a little suspicious. Oldie had said that this wasn't the grave of the principal and his daughter. Why were there 2 people here? The fat man's father had the same thought as me. He asked old he, "Uncle he, are you sure they're not the ones buried here?" Oldie shook his head. "Of course not. You're a coroner in the village. Take a closer look at this skeleton. The bone is thick. It was obviously a man when he was alive. Look at the extra arm. It's also a man's bone. Thus, it's definitely not the principal and his daughter." The fat man's father nodded and muttered, "If it's not them, then who are they?" Oldie shook his head again. "It's not 2 people. It's just a person and an arm. I've checked earlier. There aren't any other skeletons nearby." He sounded very confident, but we didn't doubt his words. Just like what Anichin had said, Oldie was very capable. Although we didn't know what method he had used to check, if he said so, it had to be true. However, we were even more confused. We couldn't understand why there was a person and an arm buried in the grave of the principal and his daughter. Moreover, they didn't belong to them. Then, where did the principal's skeleton go? And what about his daughter? Oldie didn't answer our questions. He took out a yellow talisman he had prepared and pasted it on the extra bone. At the same time, he mumbled something I didn't understand. Eventually, he wrapped the bone with a black cloth. By then, the middle-aged man had already prepared a box. Oldie placed the wrapped bones into the box and kept it. Fatty's father was the first to understand. He asked Oldie, "Uncle he, the blood infant was this arm?" Oldie nodded and didn't say much. He took out something that looked like a dial from his pocket and pinched his fingers as he looked at the dial. He moved it left and right as if he was trying to detect something. I was amazed. I didn't know why the terrifying blood baby I'd seen earlier had turned into an arm. These were 2 completely different things. Even if I believed Oldie's words, I still couldn't understand this matter. Later on, I asked the fat man's father. He told me that although the blood baby had almost become a flesh-eating baby, it hadn't fully formed yet. That was why it was just a Ean's soul. Moreover, Ean's soul needs something to exist. That arm was what it relied on. After listening to his explanation, I thought about the red shadow and understood what he meant. After a while, Oldie used his feet to make several footprints on the ground. Then, he stopped and asked us to work together. We had to put the complete skeleton back into the coffin and fill in the grave that we had dug up. Of course, he didn't let Fatty and I do it. We only helped when it was time to fill the grave. After we were done, we got into the car, but didn't go back. Oldie pointed in a direction and asked the middle-aged man to drive. I couldn't help but ask him where we were going. Oldie finally opened his mouth to explain to us. If I'm not wrong, the person in the grave was one of the 28 people that died, and that arm was the old principal's arm. If that's the case, there were 28 people, so naturally, there would be 28 graves. His words shocked me. According to him, the principal had been dismembered into 28 pieces and buried in 28 different places. I asked Oldie and got an affirmative answer. My heart felt heavy. At the same time, I couldn't understand why it had turned out this way. Fatty's father seemed to know more than me. He immediately understood and asked Oldie, "Are you saying that this grave was set up by someone? Was it the person who moved the principal's grave? But that can't be right. If that person had spent that much effort to set up 28 graves, why would something like this happen? Could it be that there's something wrong with the layout of the tomb?" Oldie shook his head. There was no mistake. It was perfect. He achieved his goal. Hearing this, the fatty's father's calm face showed a trace of shock. He asked loudly, "You mean that person purposely set up this trap to raise the shaved head ghost and the flesh-eating baby?" Oldie nodded and squinted his eyes. After that incident, Li Onbong's resentful energy was about to dissipate. As long as the burial ground wasn't a place with bad geomancy or a place to raise corpses, there wouldn't be any more changes. But this person appeared at this time and ordered them to set up such a large formation. He definitely didn't do it to suppress Li Onbong's evil spirit. The shaved head ghost, was born from the souls of the 28 people. Those 28 people tore off their hair and died. That's why the shaved head ghost was born. But now, the flesh-eating baby that the shaved head ghost raised is residing in Li Onbong's skeleton. It's clear that he used the bones of those 28 people to raise Li Onbong's skeleton. This person isn't simple. I didn't understand Oldie's words, but the fatty's father's face changed. He asked in fright, "Why did he spend so much effort? I don't understand. I can only calculate the location of the other graves, but I can't see the mysteries of this graveyard formation. After we find all the graves, I'm sure we'll be able to see through that person's scheme." From a moment Andy Chin finished her story, Oldie's face had been solemn. Even when he was trying his best to deal with the blood baby, he didn't look this serious. I didn't know what he was thinking about. Following the direction he pointed, we quickly reached the foot of a mountain. Oldie had reached the right place. After he got out of the car, we were stunned. There was no grave mound here, let alone a tombstone. As I was about to ask, Oldie took out the dial-like thing he had used before. I asked the fatty's father. It's called a compass. He looked at the compass and turned around, chanting, "Kin long xiang wu, jin long xiang yin, jin long xiang shun, feng long xiang yu." Every time he recited sentence, he would walk in a different direction. After walking for about 9 steps, he would recite another sentence and walk again. After walking in this manner for 4 times, he stopped at a place. He stomped on the ground with his foot and said, "It's here." Just as we were about to start digging, the fat man's father asked Oldie, "The Kin dragon leads to the Wu, and the Jin dragon leads to the Yin. These are the 5 elements, the ghost Yao. They are all extremely ominous positions." Oldie sneered and nodded. To be able to raise an evil creature like the flesh-eating baby, of course, they're all in the ominous positions. The fatty's father didn't say anything. He came to pick up the tools and started digging with us. After digging for a while, our hoe touched the tombstone. We dug hard and cleared the soil around us. We found a tombstone that was buried in the ground. It was the same as the previous tombstone, with the words Li Anbong and Li Ying, father and daughter, written on it. Digging up this tombstone proved that Old He's speculation was correct. However, he didn't look happy. Instead, he looked even grimmer. Without saying a word, he took the lead and continued to dig. The fatty and I wanted to help, but since it was time to dig up the remains, we were separated. Not long after that, the grave was also dug up. When it was time to open the grave, Old He sent me, the fatty, and even the middle-aged man away, leaving only him and the fatty's father. They looked solemn, as if there was an evil creature that wasn't any weaker than the blood-eating baby. After we hid far away, Oldie took out the brush and cinnabar we'd seen last time. He wrote a yellow talisman, then took out the thing that looked like a peach with sword and a board. He raised the yellow talisman and chanted an incantation that we didn't understand. Then, he threw the yellow talisman into the grave. Bang! It sounded like someone had thrown a firecracker. The grave finally opened. Following this sound, a white shadow suddenly flashed out of the grave. It was only the size of 2 palms, but it did not charge towards Old He and the others. Instead, it spun 2 rounds in the air with extreme speed, and with a shio sound, disappeared into the distance. The fatty's father was puzzled. Old He, what is that thing? Old He sighed and said, Kinlong, Kuan rabbit, mountain shaking monkey, sun chicken, dry horse, snakehead. The previous grave was at the can position, and the Kinlong was the main grave. It raised the flesh-eating baby. This grave is at the Kuan position. The Kuan rabbit is good at escaping, so it has already left. Since it hasn't formed yet, it won't be a big deal. Lin Aching asked again, Uncle He, did you recognize this grave formation? It was just a guess before, but now it's confirmed. The main evil and the side evil, the taboo, is 28. This grave formation is the 28 Fiend Yellow Springs formation. Of course, the fatty and I didn't understand it. The fatty's father didn't seem to understand it either. He frowned and thought for a while, as if he wanted to ask more. However, Oldie waved his hand and asked him to deal with the bones first. Just like the previous grave, this one had a complete set of human bones, plus an extra bone. However, this time, it was a leg bone. After dealing with it, Oldie used the same method to store the old principal's leg bone. It was getting late. We didn't head to the next grave, but returned to the county. I didn't know what Oldie was thinking, but he didn't rush me and the fatty to return to school. Instead, he arranged for us to stay in a hotel. The next day, he called the fatty's father to go out, while the fatty and I returned to school. There was still no news of Guo Mingming in school. I didn't know how he was doing, but the other students in the dormitory were fine. We stayed in school for 3 days. On the weekend, the fatty and I went to the hotel again. At night, Old He and the fatty's father came back. According to them, the 28 graves had been dug out, and the old principal's remains were all found. It sounded like it was done, but Old He said that we still had to find the real Eye of the Formation the next day. The biggest problem was there. The fatty's father shook his head. Logically speaking, it shouldn't be. Why is Li Anbong's remains used to set up the formation? But the Eye of the Formation is his daughter's body. Li Anbong was the one with the most grievances. Old He chuckled. A 3-year-old shaving ghost, a half-armored flesh-eating infant, and a 300-year-old demonic Rakshasa. Did you forget? The fatty's father's eyes widened. How is that possible? How is it not possible? 28 Fiend Yellow Springs formation gave birth to a Rakshasa. It's like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. It's normal. But, the fatty's father wanted to say something, but he couldn't. Oldie waved his hand and stopped him. It's useless to say more now. You'll find out tomorrow. With that, he left alone. The next day, they brought me and the fatty, and we set off in a car. The strange thing was, I was getting more and more familiar with the road. We actually drove from the county to our village. I asked Old He curiously, but he said, the Eye of the Formation is here. After entering the village, Old He didn't stop the car to check the direction. Instead, he directed the middle-aged man to drive to the back of the mountain near our junior high school. When we got there, I pinched the jade bracelet on my neck. I panicked and my face paled. Chapter 14. Back then, the fatty and I had stolen food in this graveyard and drank that glass of wine. Then, we met the Red Shadow. After knowing her for a year, I was extremely scared at first. But after spending so much time with her, and after she massaged my legs a few days before the high school entrance exam, I gradually stopped being afraid of her. I even thought of her as a mute friend who would only appear at night. No, she even talked to me a few days ago. She wasn't mute. I couldn't and didn't want to believe that she was some evil thing. But why did old he and the others find this place? What was the demon woman they were talking about? Thinking back to the evil blood infant I saw that day, and the usually gentle Red Shadow, the difference between them was more than 1,000 miles. But no matter what, I knew that they weren't human. I was so anxious and confused that I sat there in a daze after they got off the car. The fatty extended his hand and pulled me out of the car. "What are you doing?" After asking, he didn't wait for me to go home and moved closer to me. He hugged my neck and whispered, "Third baby, do you remember that we came here to steal food during the Ghost Festival on the third day of the Chinese New Year? Didn't you say that you saw a red shadow? I remember drinking a glass of wine at a grave, right? Let's go look for that grave. Maybe what my dad said is related to the red shadow you saw." The fatty was a careless person. He was talking excitedly and didn't notice that my expression wasn't right. I pretended to smile and said, "Don't spout nonsense. I've seen the red shadow once or twice, and then it disappeared. There's no way it has anything to do with what your dad said. If it really had something to do with it, would I still be alive? It's not like you didn't see the blood infant that day. It was so scary. Didn't they say it was a carnivorous infant? They probably eat human flesh." After hearing me say that, the fatty was a little discouraged. "That's true. You probably met a wild ghost or something. I was hoping to find some clues." Then, he wasn't discouraged. Seeing that we were lagging behind old he and the others, he pulled me forward again. At this time, I thought a method. I suddenly held my stomach and cried out in pain. Then, I told the fatty that I needed to go to the toilet. The fatty naturally didn't suspect anything, and even helped me inform old he and the others. Old he had specifically told me not to go too far, or else it would be dangerous. However, I couldn't wait to run as far away as I could. Oldie's abilities were very mysterious. Who knew if he would notice me if I called out the red shadow? Running as far away as possible was definitely the right thing to do. Eventually, I ran to the other side of the mountain and found a small forest to hide. Panting, I took out the jade bracelet and called Red Shadow, asking her to come out quickly. I used to think that the red shadow could only come out at night. However, on the way to the fatty's ancestral house, she appeared during the day. I guess she could come out during the day, too. As expected, as soon as I called out, the jade bracelet on my chest turned cold. The red shadow quickly appeared in front of me. I hadn't seen Red Shadow for a few days. In fact, ever since she gave me the jade bracelet, she wasn't like she was at the beginning. Every night, she wouldn't stay by my bedside. Except for the first day, she would only show up when I called her. It was also like that night at the fatty's house. No matter how many times I called her, she wouldn't come out. At that time, she didn't tell me the reason. However, after what had happened in the past few days, I understood that the red shadow was a taboo. No matter what, she wasn't a human. With this thought, I looked at the red shadow in front of me and felt an inexplicable sadness in my heart. I didn't know if it was the same for other people, but I would always have feelings for something that stayed with me for a certain period of time. It was the same for my family, the cats and dogs I had when I was young, and even the stationery I used to use. The red shadow looked the same as the first time I saw her. She wore a phoenix crown and a red robe, and her head was covered with a veil. After so many days, I hadn't even seen her face under the veil. Of course, I wasn't too curious. If she looked like the blood baby, I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to accept it. Looking at the red shadow, I kept silent for a while. Then, I told her what old he had told me about the shaved ghost, the flesh-eating baby, the ghost woman Rakshasa, and the 28 Fiend Yellow Springs formation. Then, I asked, "Are you the ghost woman Rakshasa they mentioned?" After asking this question, I looked at the red shadow. My heart was pounding. I was afraid that I would hear an answer that I didn't want to hear. The red shadow answered me quickly. It was short and short. No. My heart that had been hanging in the air for a long time finally relaxed. I exhaled. I was relieved. I didn't think that the red shadow would lie to me. She had never harmed me, and she had no reason to lie to me. After getting the confirmation, I remembered the advice the red shadow had given me that day. She had told me not to go to the dormitory. At that time, I didn't know about the existence of the flesh-eating baby. Now that I thought about it, the red shadow was afraid that I would encounter the baby. Perhaps she wanted to protect me. It wasn't a big deal at first. However, when we faced the baby, he couldn't deal with it. I held the jade bracelet in my hand and punched him. I was puzzled, so I asked the red shadow. This time, the red shadow didn't answer me. It just stood there in silence, as if it wanted to say something. However, it didn't open its mouth. After a while, the shadow flashed and disappeared. I didn't know why the red shadow didn't answer me. I was puzzled. However, I could feel that the red shadow had returned to the jade bracelet on my chest. I had been out for a long time. If I didn't go back soon, the fatty and the others would come to find me. After hurrying back, he and the other two stopped in front of the tomb. They seemed to have confirmed the location and were surrounding the tomb to observe. The little fatty craned his neck to look in my direction. When he saw me, he excitedly waved at me and shouted, "Third baby, come here. It's about to start." The daring young man didn't understand the hidden dangers. He was only excited about the unknown. Fatty and I had been the same before. Even after we'd fought against the blood infant, we hadn't been too afraid. But this time I wasn't as excited. I didn't know if it was because this matter had implicated Red Shadow, or if Red Shadow's hesitant expression made me feel uneasy. After I got there, I checked the tomb. It was just a small mound with no tombstone. This was actually normal. There weren't many villagers who could erect a tombstone. Most of them just stuck a wooden sign. Not long after, the wooden sign would decay and disappear, leaving only a mound there. At this moment, he and the fatty's father were talking. Unlike the excitement on the fatty's face, they were serious. He said, "The tomb doesn't have resentment energy, and its feng shui is different from the 28 tombs. The 28 tombs were lonely and evil, but this tomb has excellent feng shui. It's hard to find a dragon on a flat land. Look at this mountain. It's the ancestor of this place. Look at the mound in front of you. A dragon in the mountain is not as good as a mound in front of a tomb. Ah Chung, you're the village coroner. You've been searching for tombs for decades. How many places with feng shui like this have you seen?" The fatty's father's face looked even worse. He shook his head and said, "It's been more than 20 years since my father passed away. I haven't seen a single place with feng shui like this, let alone a few. But that's not important. What's important is that this shouldn't be the feng shui of our village." "What do you mean?" Although he is experienced and knowledgeable, Fatty's father naturally has more right to speak on matters of the village. Ever since I was young, I follow my father around the entire village. At that time, I was different from the children of today. I didn't go to school. We're all writers and have been learning since we were young. We've never seen feng shui like this. Perhaps my eyesight isn't good enough to see a true dragon, but I'm the 9th generation. There's no reason for the 8 generations of ancestors to be wrong," the fatty's father said with certainty. "Moreover, I've been in charge of all the tombs in the village. Even the tombs my father had been in charge of 30 years ago, I've followed him to look at them one by one. But I've never seen this tomb, much less this feng shui." He asked, "So you're saying that it's a moving dragon?" The fatty's father shook his head, but didn't say anything else. He sighed and said, "Actually, it doesn't matter whether it's a moving dragon or not. The 28 tombs of the Yellow Springs have already been laid out. So what if this feng shui can produce a general or a minister? What we're raising is still an evil being. All right, let's do it." At his command, the middle-aged man standing at the side prepared to go to the car to get tools. However, Oldie stopped him and scolded him. "You idiot, do you think you could dig up a tomb just because you want to? You have to think before you do anything." After being scolded by the middle-aged man stood there and didn't dare to say anything. He looked like he was submissive. I was a little puzzled. I'd always thought that this person was Old He's chauffeur. Now that I saw Old He's angry expression, he might even be his nephew. After scolding him, Old He brought the fatty's father with him. The two of them took out the ink dough line they'd used before and prepared to seal the tomb. This time, however, they used cinnabar. From what Old He said, he was prepared to seal the tomb first. He wasn't going to open the tomb today. I didn't know why, but I heaved a sigh of relief. I just let out a sigh of relief. Who knew that something would happen to the tomb? After Old He calculated the position, he and the fatty's father used the ink dough line to flick it on the ground. Before the red mark of the cinnabar could be seen on the ground, the ink line broke. The ink line was a very flexible material. It was like cowhide. Not to mention the two of them flicking it lightly. Even two strong men might not be able to break it. But it was broken. Chapter 15. From the first encounter with the Red Shadow to the Blood Infant and Guomingming's soul, I had seen many strange things. However, none of them could compare to the sudden breaking of the ink line. No matter how terrifying the Blood Infant and the ghost were, there were things that my eyes could see. However, this ink line was different. Nothing could touch it. It was as if it had offended a god and was being punished by the heavens. Many years later, I learned that it was a kind of rule. When the difference in power was too big, it created an invisible force. It was like an ant trying to deal with an elephant. The elephant didn't need to move, but if the ant tried to bite it, its jaws would be broken by the elephant's thick hide. Oldie's face was calm, as if he wasn't surprised at all. Keeping silent for a while, he took the bowl of cinnabar and mumbled something. Then, he pinched the middle finger of his right hand. I didn't see him use the knife, but the tip of his middle finger started to bleed. He flicked his finger, and 2 drops of blood flew into the bowl. When the blood touched the cinnabar, it was as if it had touched a sponge. It was absorbed immediately. The half bowl of cinnabar looked even redder. Later on, I learned that blood from the tip of the tongue and the tip of the finger had the most yang energy. The tip of the finger pointed to the tip of the middle finger. After doing all that, Old He poured the cinnabar into the ink chamber and pulled out the ink line again. Then, he flicked the ink line on the ground. This time, the ink line didn't break. It left a dark red line on the ground. But after the ink line was imprinted, a clear bang suddenly came from that ordinary little grave mound. The fatty's father's face changed. The fatty and I also looked at the mound in fright. Oldie was calm. Don't panic. Although the 28 Fiend Yellow Springs formation is magical, the baby hasn't formed yet. We've taken the headmaster's remains, so we don't have anything to feed it. The Rakshasa shouldn't have formed yet. That thud was caused by the formation cutting off the flow of Een energy after the grave was sealed. It's not a big deal. After listening to him, we calmed down. The two of them continued to work. They used the ink line to draw a total of 72 lines around the mound. It was much more complicated than the one they had used to seal the Blood Infant's grave. According to Old He, it's a simple formation, but we don't understand it. After sealing the grave, Old He asked the middle-aged man to pack up his things and take us back home for the time being. On the way back, Old He said to Fatty's father, "Ah Chung, don't come again tomorrow with the 2 kids. I've contacted some people to help. It might be dangerous." Fatty's father nodded and said, "Yeah, the 2 kids can't come anymore, but I'll come tomorrow." Old man, he frowned, but before he could speak, Fatty's father continued, "This grave is in our village, and I'm the village coroner. No matter what, I have to come and take a look. What's more, Uncle He, don't forget that I'm the 9th generation puppet master. If something really happens, I might be able to play a bigger role than you." Even I couldn't help but cast a sidelong glance at him. Fatty's father had always been a man of few words. I didn't expect him to say something so immodest. Old He was a capable and hot-tempered man. When he heard that, he might get angry. However, it was strange that Old He didn't get angry. Instead, he looked as if he couldn't bear it. He asked, "You're talking about the 9th generation's fate?" Fatty's father nodded. "My family has lived in this village for generations. Since this grave has appeared here, it's my responsibility. No matter what, I have to do something. Oldie sighed. Why do you have to do this? 9 generations of loneliness in exchange for this blessing. You have to think about your kids. Lin Aching, who always had a sad face, grinned at this moment. We, as coroners, have unknowingly allowed a grave to be erected in our village. We've already disgraced our ancestors. If we continue to ignore it, I'm afraid our ancestors will no longer protect us unfilial descendants. Uncle He, you don't need to persuade me. I made up my mind. I still didn't understand what they were talking about, but I had a feeling that it wasn't something good. Fatty exchanged looks with me. His eyes were also filled with worry. Since it was the weekend, Fatty and I didn't go back to school. Oldie drove us home. Since Fatty's father was in trouble the last time we went back to the village, my parents knew what had happened at school. They kept asking me about it when we got home. Oldie had already briefed me, and I didn't want my parents to worry too much. So, I simply told them about the dormitory and that everything had been resolved. At night, I called Red Shadow out to ask if she knew anything about the grave. Red Shadow didn't answer me. She just sat there in a daze. In the end, I had to give up. Although I guessed that Red Shadow's appearance had something to do with the glass of wine we had drunk in the graveyard, I couldn't remember which grave we had drunk that night. As long as Red Shadow didn't tell me, I wouldn't know. Early the next morning, when the sky had just brightened, I sneaked to the Fatty's house. I was thinking that I should go to his house and wait for the Fatty's father to leave. Then I would go find the Fatty and ask if I should go with him today. Of course, I wanted to go with him. I had seen everything that had happened in the past few days. It didn't make sense for me to leave at the last moment. As for the danger, I had thought about it. Fatty and I would hide in the distance. Even if there was any danger, it wouldn't affect us. Because of this, I took the binoculars my parents had bought me when I was young. Although it was just a toy, it could give me 2 or 3 times the field of vision. However, before I could reach Fatty's house, I bumped into Fatty on the way. After asking, I found out that Fatty's father had gone to the ancestral house last night. He was the only one at home. That was why he had run out so early. He wanted to go and discuss with me. Fatty was worried about his father's safety, and I was curious. Of course, we hit it off. Since Fatty's father had to go home before he left, we went to Fatty's house to wait for him. When Fatty's father came back, we would follow him. Unexpectedly, we waited until 9 o'clock a.m. The sun was already high in the sky, but we still didn't see Fatty's father. I guess he had gone to the graveyard with Old He and the others. Since we knew the place, we didn't wait any longer and went there together. When we reached the ground, there were a few cars parked outside the graveyard. All of them were black Santanas. In front of the grave the day before, 7 or 8 people were digging it up. Fatty's father was one of them. Oldie didn't do it himself. He was chatting with 2 other old men. One of them had a bun on his head and wore a yellow robe. He looked like a Taoist priest. Fatty and I didn't dare to get close to him. We hid behind a big rock. Not long after we arrived, the nameless tomb was opened. However, there was no commotion. It wasn't as noisy as yesterday. However, Old He and the others were very cautious. After the grave was opened, they immediately called for the 7 or 8 grave diggers to step back. Meanwhile, Old He and the 2 people beside him took out their weapons at the same time. Oldie's weapon was the one that looked like a peachwood sword and a wooden board. The Taoist priest was holding a real sword that emitted cold light. It looked really scary. The last old man had a pure peachwood sword in his hand. The 3 of them stood there for a long time, as if they were facing a great enemy, but there was no movement from the grave. Then they heard Old He say something, and the 7 or 8 people who had been digging the grave earlier used the ropes they had prepared to throw into the grave. After a while, they pulled out a coffin from the grave together. I snatched the binoculars from the Fatty's hands and went closer to take a look. It was different from the coffins we had found in the 28 tombs. This coffin hadn't decayed at all. The carvings on its surface had a cold light. It looked like the coffin in the Fatty's house that had just been painted. It didn't look like a coffin that had been buried underground for dozens of years. Old He and the other 2 were still holding their weapons in their hands, standing in a triangular formation. Fatty's father, on the other hand, walked to the front of the coffin, holding a tool specially used to open coffins. He lowered his head and fiddled with the coffin a few times, then walked to the end of the coffin and reached out to pull the lid. After a hoarse and unpleasant grinding sound, the lid of the coffin was opened. It was a bright and sunny day. However, I didn't know if it was just an illusion, but after the coffin was opened, the surrounding sky suddenly darkened. However, no one noticed it. Everyone's eyes were attracted by the thing inside the coffin. They all gazed at it, their eyes filled with disbelief. Then they gasped in surprise. Since we were hiding low, we could see the coffin through the binoculars, but we couldn't see what was inside. After hearing their exclamation, I didn't have time to hide anymore. I got up and stood on the big rock, tiptoeing to see what was inside the coffin. Then, I was also scared out of my wits. I had thought that there would be a pile of rotten bones or something similar to a blood baby. However, I didn't expect that there would be a woman inside. Or rather, it was a woman's corpse. However, this corpse was well preserved. It looked as if she had just died this morning and was placed inside the coffin to be buried. I didn't expect that this corpse had been dug up. Through the binoculars, I could even see the skin on her face. There wasn't a trace of purple. Quite the contrary, her skin was rosy. According to my previous speculation, this grave should be the daughter of the old headmaster, Liang. If Liang was this beautiful when she was alive, it wasn't strange that all the boys in the school liked her. The fat man looked at me as if he had seen a ghost. He immediately snatched the binoculars. After a quick glance, he cursed and dropped the binoculars in his hand. At this moment, the fat man's father had retreated far away from the coffin. The group of people looked at each other. Apparently, they didn't expect to see such a situation inside the coffin. After the chaos continued for a while, the three old men gathered everyone together, probably because there was no movement from the corpse in the coffin. They seemed to be ready to discuss the next step. However, right at this moment, a black Volkswagen Santana was lying on the ground. No one had touched it, but it moved by itself. Then a pile of wooden boxes rolled out of the bag. Since we were far from the grave, the group of people who were discussing didn't notice the commotion. Only the fat man and I noticed it. We gawked at the same time. After the wooden boxes rolled out, they didn't stop. The lids on them were opened one by one, and some objects of different sizes wrapped in black cloth rolled out of the boxes. At this moment, I finally recognized them. Weren't those the remains of the old headmaster that we had dug up? These skeletons wrapped in black cloth seemed to be guided by an unknown force, slowly and soundlessly drifting in the direction where old he and the others were gathered. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.